You disgraced that uniform, and now you'll answer for it. Colonel Jonathan Whitaker spat the words into Commander Emily Carter's face, then tore the sidearm from her holster with his bare hands, the strap snapping, and hurled it at a guard. 17 days behind enemy lines. 14 soldiers dragged home alive, and the man sent to welcome her seized her arm and shoved her toward the military police like she was a criminal. Her wounded men screamed from the ramp. Whitaker never once looked at them. He wanted her broken, humiliated, erased. What he did not know was that his own voice 3 days earlier had already been recorded saying the words that would end him. Before we go any further, if stories about loyalty, betrayal, and the moment the truth finally wins mean something to you, take 1 second right now and subscribe to this channel. Follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens to Emily Carter will stay with you. And when you have a moment, leave a comment and tell me the city you are watching from, because I truly love seeing how far these stories travel and who is out there listening. The helicopter touched down at Naval Special Warfare Base Coronado just before sunrise, and for the first time in 17 days, Emily Carter allowed herself to breathe. Not fully, not the way a person breathes when they are safe, but enough to feel the weight of what her body had been carrying finally begin to shift. She was 36 years old, and she had aged a decade in less than 3 weeks. Behind her, the men of her team sat slumped against the interior walls of the aircraft, each one of them alive, each one of them broken in some small or terrible way. Chief Marcus Reynolds had a shoulder that had been shattered by shrapnel and held together by nothing but field bandages and stubbornness. Petty Officer Daniel Hayes could not put weight on his left leg, and young specialist Noah Brooks, barely 22 years old, had not said a single word in more than 9 hours. He just stared at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. Emily counted them. She always counted them. 14 faces. She touched each one with her eyes before she let herself move toward the door. "That's everybody," she said quietly, mostly to herself. Reynolds heard her anyway. He always did. "You brought us home, Commander," he said, his voice hoarse. "You said you would. I said I'd try. You did more than try." She almost smiled. Almost. There was something waiting for her out there on that runway. She could feel it before she could see it, that old instinct that had kept her alive in places where instinct was the only thing standing between a soldier and a grave. The rear door lowered, and through the gray light of morning she saw them. Not a medical team, not a welcome, not the base commander with a handshake and a blanket and hot coffee. Instead, she saw uniforms arranged in a formation she recognized instantly because she had been trained to recognize threats. Military police, 6 of them, spread out in a semicircle, hands resting near their weapons. And standing in the center of them in a pressed uniform that had never seen a day of dirt was Colonel Jonathan Whitaker. Emily stopped at the edge of the ramp. Her men gathered behind her, some standing, some being helped by others. 14 soldiers who had walked through fire, looking out at a wall of law enforcement, pointed at their own commander. "Colonel," Emily said, her voice was steady, exhausted but steady. "My team requires immediate medical attention. 3 critical, 4 serious. I need a triage unit on this flight line right now." Whitaker did not move. He did not glance at the wounded men. He did not so much as blink toward the boy who had stopped speaking. "Commander Emily Carter," he said loud enough for every person on that runway to hear, "you are being relieved of command, effective immediately." For a moment, nobody breathed. Reynolds stepped forward, dragging his bad leg, his good arm reaching to steady himself on the aircraft frame. "Sir, with respect, what the hell is this?" "Stand down, Chief," Whitaker snapped. "This does not concern you." "It absolutely concerns me. She just carried me 11 miles. "Chief Reynolds," Emily said without turning around. "Stand down." He stopped, because she had said it, because after 17 days, her voice was still the only order that mattered to those men. Emily looked at Whitaker. She studied his face the way she studied everything, quietly, completely missing nothing. She saw the tightness in his jaw. She saw that his eyes never once dropped to the men behind her. And she understood something in that instant that made her blood go cold, colder than any night in the mountains had made it. This was not a reaction. This was a plan. This was a... "Sir," she said slowly, "my men are bleeding. Whatever this is, it can wait 90 seconds while we get them to medical." "Your men," Whitaker said, "are no longer your responsibility." The words landed like a slap, not just on Emily, on all of them. Hayes, leaning against Brooks, let out a bitter laugh that had no humor in it at all. No longer her responsibility, he repeated. Sir, she is the only reason we have a heartbeat. Petty officer, one more word and you'll be joining her. Emily raised a hand slightly, a signal her men knew. Quiet. Not because Whitaker deserved obedience, because she needed them safe, and arguing with a man who had already made up his mind was a good way to end up in the cell right next to her. Surrender your sidearm, Whitaker said. Umama. She unholstered it, cleared it with practiced ease, and held it out grip first. A staff sergeant from the military police took it, and she saw that even he could not meet her eyes. Your identification and your access badge. She handed those over too. Colonel, she said, and now there was something different in her voice, something quiet and dangerous underneath the calm. I wanted on the record that I requested medical care from my team 4 times before you finished processing my arrest. Noted, he said, though he wrote nothing down. And I wanted on the record that you have not once looked at them. That got him. For half a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt. Guilt would have been human. It was something closer to irritation, the look of a man annoyed that a detail he had considered unimportant was being pointed out in front of an audience. Take her to processing, he said. 2 of the military police stepped forward, and that was when Specialist Noah Brooks, the boy who had not spoken in 9 hours, opened his mouth. She went back for me. Everyone turned, Whitaker included. Brooks was shaking. His voice was thin, cracked, barely holding together. But he said it again louder so no one could pretend they had not heard. On the ridge, when they had us pinned, she went back for me, alone. I told her to leave me, and she said, we don't do that. She said, nobody gets left. And she came back through open fire and she carried me out. He was crying now and he did not care. So whatever you think she did wrong, sir, I am alive because of her. All of us are. The runway was silent. Emily turned her head just enough to look at the boy. Noah, she said gently. It's all right. Stand easy. It's not all right, Brooks said. None of this is all right. I know. She held his eyes. But I need you to trust me one more time. Can you do that? He swallowed hard, nodded. Then get to medical. Let them fix that shoulder. That's an order, and it might be the last one I get to give you, so make it count. The boy's face crumpled, but he nodded again. The military police took Emily by both arms. She did not resist. She let them turn. Let them walk her across the flight line, and she kept her spine straight the entire way, because she would be damned if the last thing her men saw was their commander bowing her head. Whitaker watched her go with the faint satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won. He had made exactly one mistake. He had assumed that a commander stripped of her weapon, her badge, and her authority was a commander stripped of everything. He was about to learn how wrong that was. The room they put her in was small and gray and cold, the kind of room designed to make a person feel small and gray and cold along with it. A metal table, 2 metal chairs, a single bottle of water sweating on the surface, a camera in the corner with a small red light that told her someone somewhere was watching. 2 guards stood outside the door. She could hear them shift their weight every few minutes. Emily sat down. She folded her hands on the table, and she did the one thing that had kept her alive more times than any weapon ever had. She thought. Panic, she knew, was the true killer. Panic made people run into the open. Panic made people miss the obvious. She had watched panic destroy trained soldiers faster than any enemy ever could. And so, for as long as she could remember when everything went wrong, Emily Carter got quiet and she got careful, and she started counting the things that did not add up. The first thing that did not add up was the timing. The military police had been on that flight line before the helicopter landed. She had seen them arranged in formation and position ready. That did not happen by accident. That did not happen from a spontaneous decision. Someone had to make calls. Someone had to file requests. Someone had to move personnel into position and brief them on what they were doing there, which meant the order to arrest her had been given while she was still in the air. The second thing that did not add up was the paperwork. Whitaker had recited the relief of command like a man reading a script he had rehearsed. There was no hesitation, no ambiguity, no room left for her to explain. Relief of command was not a thing a commander did on impulse on a flight line. It was a formal action that generated documents, and documents took time to prepare, which meant those documents had been prepared in advance. The third thing, and this was the one that made her stomach turn, was that Whitaker had not asked a single question, not one. He had not asked how the mission ended. He had not asked how many survived. He had not asked what happened out there in 17 days of silence. A commander who genuinely believed his officer had done something wrong would have wanted to know what. He would have been furious, demanding hungry for the story so he could confirm his suspicions. Whitaker had wanted none of that. He had not wanted the story at all, because he already knew the story, and the story terrified him. Emily leaned back in the metal chair and stared at the red light of the camera. "You planned this," she said out loud to no one, to everyone. "You planned this before I even got home." The realization did not make her afraid. It made her steady, because a planned attack had a purpose, and a purpose had a source, and a source could be found. This was not chaos. This was a man protecting himself, and a man protecting himself was a man who had something to hide. The only question was what? She was still sitting with that question when the door opened. It was not a lawyer. It was not an investigator. It was Chief Marcus Reynolds, one arm in a fresh sling, moving stiffly, escorted by a young corporal who looked deeply uncertain about whether he was allowed to be doing this. "Chief," Emily said, sitting up, "how did you get in here?" "I told the kid I'd give a statement," Reynolds said, nodding at the corporal. "Technically true. I'm going to give one, just not the one they want." He lowered himself into the chair across from her with a grunt. "Corporal, give us 2 minutes. You're doing the right thing, son." The young man hesitated, then stepped just outside and pulled the door mostly shut. "You should be in medical," Emily said. "I was. They stitched me up. I walked out." He leaned forward, dropping his voice. "Emily, listen to me. It's worse than you think. Tell me." Whitaker's already reached out to the investigators. He's ordering statements from the whole team, and he's not asking neutral questions. Reynolds' jaw tightened. He's feeding them a version. He's telling them you disobeyed a direct order, that you endangered the mission, that you went rogue. He wants the team to sign statements blaming you for the whole thing. Emily was very still. And the team, Reynolds actually smiled, a fierce, proud, painful smile. "Told them to go to hell. Every last one of them. Even Brooks and that kid can barely stand up. Nobody's signing anything. Nobody's blaming you for saving our lives." Something loosened in Emily's chest just slightly. "They shouldn't put themselves at risk for me." "With respect, ma'am, that's not your call. You made your choice on that ridge. This is ours." He winced as he shifted his shoulder. "But Emily, here's what's got me scared. Why is he moving this fast? Why is he trying to bury it before anybody's even asking questions? A guy relieves a decorated officer of command the second she lands, no investigation, no hearing, statements ordered within the hour. That's not a guy who thinks he's right. That's a guy who's afraid." "I know," Emily said quietly. "I've been sitting here thinking the same thing." Afraid of what? And there it was, the center of everything. Emily looked at her old friend across the cold metal table, and she felt the shape of it forming in her mind, the answer she had been circling since the moment her boots touched the runway. "He's afraid of what actually happened out there," she said. "Not the version he's selling. The real one. Marcus, think about it. If I disobeyed an order and it got people killed, he wouldn't need to rush. He'd let the bodies speak for themselves. He'd let the investigation come to him. He'd be calm because the truth would be on his side." Reynolds went very still. "But he's not calm." "He's not calm," Emily agreed. "He's terrified, which means the truth isn't on his side, which means the truth is on ours, and he knows it, and he's trying to destroy it before anybody looks too closely." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, because they both knew what the truth was. They had both lived it 3 days earlier in a place where the air itself had felt like it wanted them dead. 3 days ago, Reynolds said slowly. "The ridge." "The extraction request," Emily said. "He denied it. He denied it." Reynolds closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "We were done, Emily. We were finished. We had wounded, we had enemy closing in from 2 directions, and we called for extraction, and it was the only thing that was going to get us out. And he said no." Emily remembered it with a clarity that would never fade. She remembered the radio pressed to her ear. She remembered the sound of her own voice, flat and controlled, refusing to let the fear leak through. "Sir," she had said, "if we remain in this position, my men will not survive the night. I am requesting emergency extraction. I say again, emergency extraction over." And Whitaker's voice crackling back through the static calm as a man ordering lunch. "Extraction denied. Weather restriction in effect. Hold position. Follow the order." Weather restriction. She had looked up at the sky that night, clear, cold and hard and cloudless. The stars bright enough to read by. There had been no weather. There had been no restriction. She had checked the system herself, every channel she could reach, and there was nothing. No advisory, no warning, no grounding order. He had made it up. He had looked at 14 soldiers pinned down and bleeding, and he had invented a reason to leave them there to die. Follow the order, Reynolds repeated, his voice shaking with an anger 17 days deep. That's what he told you. Follow the order, and you looked at all of us, and you made a choice. I called for the alternate extraction, Emily said. You went around him. I went around him, she confirmed. There's a secondary channel for emergency coordination. Independent authorization. I invoked it. I documented the tactical justification. I put my name on it, and I called it in, and a crew came, and they pulled us off that ridge with maybe minutes to spare. She looked at Reynolds. I broke his order. I did not break the chain of command. There's a difference, and I made sure every word of that difference was said out loud on an open channel. Reynolds stared at her. So that's it. That's what he's afraid of. You didn't disobey a lawful order. You refused an unlawful one, and you did it by the book, and he can't stand the idea of anyone finding out. He filed charges before he knew if we were alive, Emily said, and the full weight of it hit her only as she said it. Marcus, think about that. He set this whole thing in motion while we were still out there. He didn't wait to see if his weather lie worked. He didn't wait to see if we all died on that ridge like he expected. Reynolds' face went pale. He was covering himself, either way. If we died, he'd have you to blame for going rogue. If we lived, he'd have to destroy me fast before I could say what he did. The room was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent light. That son of a bitch, Reynolds whispered. Emily reached across the table and gripped his good hand. Listen to me, this is important. Everything you just said, I need you to remember it exactly. Every word he said on that radio, the weather restriction, the denial, because opinions won't save me here. The team refusing to blame me that buys us time, but it won't win this. He'll say we conspired. He'll say we got our story straight. He'll say 14 soldiers loyal to their commander lied to protect her. So what wins it? Emily's eyes changed. Something sharpened in them. Something that had been buried under 17 days of exhaustion, and it came alive now like a coal finding air. Proof, she said, not memory, not testimony, proof he can't argue with and can't erase. Emily, Reynolds said slowly, he controls the base, he controls the paperwork. He probably controls half the people who'd be doing the investigating. Where in God's name are we going to find proof he can't touch? And Emily Carter, sitting in a cold gray cell with her weapon gone and her badge gone and her authority gone, smiled for the first time since the helicopter had landed, because she had just remembered something Colonel Jonathan Whitaker had forgotten. Marcus, she said quietly, how does classified command communication work? He frowned. What do you mean, how does it? And then he stopped. His mouth fell open. Oh my God. Say it. It's recorded, Reynolds breathed. Every classified command channel. It's automatically recorded, every order, every transmission. It's federal protocol. It's not even something a base commander can switch off. It goes to a separate archive. Every word he said to me on that ridge, Emily said, every word I said back, the denial, the fake weather restriction, all of it, it exists right now, sitting in an archive he does not control. Reynolds looked at her like a man who had just watched the sun come up in the middle of the night. He forgot. He didn't forget, Emily said. He never thought about it. Men like Whitaker think authority is the same thing as reality. He thinks that if he says there was a weather restriction, then there was one, because who's going to contradict a colonel? He built his whole plan around controlling the story. It never occurred to him that the story was already told in his own voice the moment he denied us. She stood up. For the first time since the runway, she felt like herself. There's a recording, she said, and it's going to tell the truth whether he wants it to or not. The door opened. The nervous corporal poked his head in. Chief, I'm sorry, I really can't. We're done, son, Reynolds said, rising. You did good. You'll never regret it. He looked back at Emily. How do we get to it? You're locked in here. I can barely walk. And every channel on this base runs through people who answer to him. Emily thought fast. David Morgan. Who? My mission coordinator from the last deployment. He's in Washington now, defense operations specialist. He has archive access that doesn't route through Coronado, and more than that, he owes me nothing, and he'll help me anyway because he's one of the good ones. She gripped Reynolds' arm. You need to reach him, not through base comms. Whitaker will be watching every line I might use. Find a way, a personal phone, a payphone, anything off the grid. Tell him exactly what I told you. Tell him to pull the command channel archive for that operation 3 days ago, the extraction denial. Tell him the exact time window. Reynolds nodded, memorizing. And if I can't reach him, you'll reach him. She looked at her friend, this man who had followed her into hell and dragged himself out of a hospital bed to sit in a cell with her. Marcus, Whitaker thinks he's already won. Right now, this hour, he thinks it's over. That's our advantage. He's not going to move fast to destroy evidence he doesn't even remember exists. But the second he remembers, the second he realizes those channels are recorded, he's going to try to bury that file so deep nobody will ever dig it out. Maybe he'll claim it's corrupted. Maybe he'll classify it into a black hole. We have to reach it before he does. Then I'm not wasting another second, Reynolds said. He turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her one more time. Emily, when we were on that ridge, when you looked at all of us and made the call, were you scared? Emily considered the question honestly. She always answered him honestly. Terrified, she said, the whole time. You never showed it. Oh, that's the job, she said. You carry the fear so they don't have to. You keep it off your face so the man next to you can keep fighting. She almost smiled. Being brave isn't not being scared, Marcus. Being brave is being scared out of your mind and doing the right thing anyway. Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened his back as much as his shoulder would let him, and something in his posture said everything words could not. Give me 24 hours, he said. I'll find your recording. And he was gone. The door closed, the lock engaged, and Emily Carter was alone again in the cold gray room with a sweating water bottle and a red camera light and the ghost of an order that should never have been given. But she was not the same woman who had walked in. That woman had been exhausted, stripped, uncertain of the ground beneath her feet. This woman had a plan. This woman had done the math. She sat back down at the metal table, folded her hands, and looked directly into the camera in the corner, into the little red eye that meant somebody was watching. She wondered if Whitaker himself was on the other end of it. She hoped he was. You should have looked at them, she said softly to the lens. On the runway, my men, you should have looked at their faces. She tilted her head. You couldn't, could you? Because if you'd looked at Brooks, at that boy who can't stop shaking you, would have had to admit what you tried to do. You tried to leave them out there, and you almost got away with it. You would have gotten away with it if they died like you expected. The red light stared back silent. But they didn't die, Emily said. They came home. And now there's 14 witnesses who won't sign your lies, and there's a recording of your voice you forgot all about, and there's me sitting right here not going anywhere. She leaned forward. You took my weapon. You took my badge. You took my command. You know what you didn't take? Silence, the truth, she said. You never had it to take. Somewhere across the base in an office far more comfortable than her cell, Colonel Jonathan Whitaker was pouring himself a drink and beginning to relax for the first time in 17 days, believing the dangerous part was finally over. He had moved fast. He had controlled the narrative. He had put the problem in a box with a lock on it. In his mind, the story was already written, and it was a story where he was a firm commander, disciplining a reckless officer who had gone rogue and gotten lucky. He had considered everything: the paperwork, the formation on the runway, the statements, the timing. He had prepared it all like a chess player, planning 6 moves ahead. He had considered everything except the one thing that mattered. He had never once considered that the machine had been listening the whole time. Every classified word he had spoken, every order, every refusal, the lie about the weather, the cold, flat denial that had nearly cost 14 soldiers their lives, all of it captured, time-stamped, and sitting safely in an archive hundreds of miles away in a system he did not control and could not reach, waiting for a man named David Morgan to open a file, waiting to speak in Whitaker's own voice, waiting to tell the world exactly what kind of man had stood on that runway and looked away from the wounded. And in her cold gray cell, Emily Carter closed her eyes, and for the first time in 17 days, she let herself rest just a little, because she knew something that Colonel Whitaker did not. The hardest part had not been surviving behind enemy lines. The hardest part was about to begin, and this time she was not fighting to bring 14 people home. This time she was fighting to make sure that what happened on that ridge could never happen to anyone else again. And she had a voice on a recording that was going to help her do it, whether Colonel Jonathan Whitaker liked it or not. She opened her eyes, looked at the red light one more time. "Your move, Colonel," she said, and she waited. Chief Marcus Reynolds walked out of that cell with a broken shoulder and a mission, and he did not have the first idea how he was going to complete it. He knew what Emily needed. A recording sitting in an archive, hundreds of miles away, reachable, only through a man named David Morgan, contacted only through a line that Whitaker could not be watching. What he did not know was how a wounded chief with no clearance to be walking around, no phone he trusted, and a colonel hunting for reasons to lock down the whole team was supposed to make any of that happen. He made it about 40 feet down the corridor before a voice stopped him cold. "Chief Reynolds." He turned. It was a lieutenant he half recognized, one of Whitaker's staff officers, a young man named Pratt with a clipboard and a nervous way of holding it against his chest like a shield. "You're supposed to be in medical," Pratt said. "I was in medical. They patched me. Now I'm walking it off." The colonel gave orders. "The whole team is to remain in the medical wing until statements are collected." Reynolds felt something cold settle in his gut. So it had already started. Whitaker was not just isolating Emily. He was corralling the witnesses, penning them up, where he could get to them one at a time, where he could lean on the scared ones and wear down the tired ones. "That's so," Reynolds said carefully. "And who's collecting these statements?" "The colonel's is signing it. Investigators are coming down this afternoon." Pratt shifted his weight. "Chief, I really do need you to head back." Reynolds looked at the young lieutenant, at the clipboard, at the way his eyes kept flicking down the hall, like he was afraid of being seen talking too long. And an instinct he had earned over 20 years told him something. This kid was not comfortable. This kid did not like what he was being made to do. "Lieutenant Pratt," Reynolds said quietly, "how old are you?" "Sir." "How old?" 26, Chief." 26. Reynolds nodded slowly. "You know how old the youngest man on my team is?" 22. "His name's Noah Brooks. 3 days ago, I watched him get pinned down on a ridge with rounds coming in from 2 directions, and I watched Commander Carter run back through open fire to drag him out because a colonel sitting safe in an office told us to hold position and die. He let that hang in the air. You're going to collect statements this afternoon. You're going to hear 14 men tell you the same story, and you're going to have to decide what kind of officer you're going to be for the rest of your career. So I'll ask you plain, are you going to walk me back to that medical wing, son, or are you going to forget you saw me?" For a long moment, Pratt did not say anything. His knuckles were white on the clipboard. And then very quietly, he looked down the hall and back at Reynolds, and he lowered his voice. "There's a phone in the equipment room on sub-level 2, Pratt said. "Old landline, not on the base directory. Maintenance uses it. It doesn't route through the command switchboard." He swallowed. "I never told you that." Reynolds looked at the kid, and something in his chest eased just a fraction. "Told me what exactly?" Pratt stepped back. "Get to medical when you're done, Chief, for the investigators. If they mark you absent, I can't cover it." "You're a good man, Lieutenant." "I'm a scared man," Pratt said. "There's a difference. Commander Carter would probably tell you it's the same thing." And he walked off fast before either of them could say anything that could get them both hanged. Reynolds stood there a second, absorbing it. Emily's words came back to him from the cell. Being brave isn't not being scared. Being brave is being scared out of your mind and doing the right thing anyway. That boy had just learned it in real time. Maybe that was how it spread. Maybe that was how one person standing up turned into 2. He found the stairwell and went down. Sublevel 2 was dim and smelled of oil and old concrete, and the equipment room was exactly where Pratt said it would be, a cramped space stacked with spare parts, and on the far wall a beige landline phone that looked like it had been installed a generation ago. Reynolds shut the door behind him. His shoulder was screaming. He ignored it. He picked up the receiver and for one terrible moment heard nothing. Then a dial tone. His hands were shaking as he dialed the number Emily had made him memorize twice. It rang. It rang again. Reynolds pressed a right, pressing the receiver so hard against his ear it hurt. Morgan! The voice on the other end was clipped, distracted, the voice of a man in the middle of 100 things. David Morgan, Defense Operations. Speaking, who is this? My name's Chief Marcus Reynolds. I served under Commander Emily Carter. She told me to call you. She said you're one of the good ones. There was a pause, a shift in the voice, all the distraction gone out of it. Where's Emily? I heard the team made it back this morning. I've been trying to reach her, and I'm getting nothing but walls. That's because she's in a cell, sir. Reynolds heard his own voice crack and forced it steady. Colonel Whitaker relieved her of command the second we landed, arrested her on the flight line, took her weapon, her badge, everything in front of the whole team. He's ordering statements to pin the mission on her. He's trying to bury her. The silence on the other end was so complete that Reynolds thought the line had died. Say that again, Morgan said. And now his voice was very quiet and very hard. He's framing her, sir, for saving our lives. Whitaker. Morgan said the name like it tasted bad. That figures. That God-forsaken figures. A breath. Chief, tell me exactly what she needs. Word for word. Don't leave anything out. And Reynolds told him. The ridge. The extraction request. The denial. The weather restriction that did not exist. The alternate channel. And then the thing that mattered most, the thing Emily had lit up about in that cold cell. She says every classified command channel is automatically recorded. She says the whole thing, Whitaker's voice denying us the fake weather call, all of it, it's sitting in an archive. She says you can pull it. She says it doesn't route through Coronado, so Whitaker can't touch it. 3 days ago, she gave me the exact time window. Reynolds recited the timestamps. Morgan repeated them back, and Reynolds could hear him writing. She's right, Morgan said slowly. She's absolutely right. That archive is federal protocol. A base commander can't disable it, can't delete from it. It goes to a central repository. A pause. But Chief, here's the thing that's got the hair standing up on my neck. If Emily figured this out, Whitaker's going to figure it out too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the second it occurs to him that his own voice is on file, he's going to do everything in his power to get that file sealed, corrupted, buried, classified into a hole so deep nobody digs it out for 20 years. Can he do that? He can't delete it, but he's got friends. He can request an emergency classification review. He can flag it for security hold pending investigation. He can tie it up in so much red tape that by the time it sees daylight, Emily's already been convicted and discharged, and it doesn't matter anymore. Morgan's voice sharpened, which means it's a race. I need to pull that file, secure a certified copy, and get it in front of somebody with the authority to act on it before Whitaker even realizes the game's changed. How long? Hours if I'm lucky. Chief, listen to me. You keep that team together. You keep every one of them from signing a single piece of paper. The recording proves what happened, but the recording plus 14 sworn statements that match it, that's a wall Whitaker cannot climb. You understand me, their testimony and that audio have to line up perfectly. That's how we bury him instead of her. They won't sign anything, sir, I promise you that. Good man, get off this line, get back before they mark you missing. A pause and then softer. And Chief, thank you for her. Emily doesn't have many people who'd stick their neck out this far. She stuck hers out for 14 of us, Reynolds said. This is the least I owe her. The line clicked dead. Reynolds hung up the receiver, and for a moment he just leaned against the cold wall of that equipment room, breathing through the pain in his shoulder, feeling something he had not let himself feel since the runway. Hope, small and fragile but real. Then he straightened up, and he went to keep 14 men from breaking. Meanwhile, in his office, Colonel Jonathan Whitaker was not relaxing anymore. The drink he had poured himself sat untouched on the desk, because a thought had crept into the back of his mind, and it would not leave. It had started as nothing, a small itch, and now it was growing into something that made his stomach feel hollow. The radio. He had spent 17 days confident that the mission was a story only he could tell. Carter had gone dark behind enemy lines. Comms had been intermittent. In the fog of a failed operation who was going to reconstruct exactly what was said and when he would control the record. He would be the ranking officer whose account defined reality. That was how it always worked. That was how it had worked before. But the extraction denial had gone out over a command channel, and command channels were recorded. Whitaker sat very still, staring at the wall. He tried to remember exactly what he had said. Extraction denied. Weather restriction in effect. Hold position. Follow the order. He had set it flat official unbothered because he had been certain that unit was finished and a dead unit did not file complaints. But they were not dead. They had come home. All 14 of them. And every word he had spoken was sitting somewhere on a server in his own voice waiting. He picked up the phone and called his aide. "Get me Sergeant Doyle in communications," he said. "Now." Because if Emily Carter was even half as sharp as her record said she was, she had already thought of the recording. And if she had thought of it then, Whitaker had very little time to make sure it never saw the light of day. He did not know that he was already too late by one phone call. But he was about to move fast, and Whitaker moving fast was a dangerous thing. Back in the medical wing, Reynolds found the team scattered across a row of beds and chairs, and he found something he had not expected. He found investigators already there. 2 of them in service uniforms going bed to bed with tablets and forms. And standing near the door supervising was Lieutenant Pratt, pale as paper, holding his clipboard against his chest. Reynolds' blood went cold. Whitaker had moved the timeline up. He had said afternoon. It was not afternoon. He had lied to Pratt, or he had simply accelerated the moment he sensed the ground shifting under him. Either way, the pressure had arrived early, and Reynolds could see it working already. He could see Petty Officer Hayes exhausted and hurting being talked to in a low voice by one of the investigators. He could see Specialist Brooks, the youngest, sitting on the edge of a bed with his hands trembling, looking like a man being asked to choose between his conscience and his career. Reynolds crossed the room faster than his shoulder wanted to let him. "Gentlemen," he said loud enough for the whole wing to hear, planting himself in the middle of everything, "nobody signs a thing." One of the investigators looked up irritated. "Chief, this is a formal process. You need to let these men speak for themselves." "They will speak for themselves," Reynolds said. "Every single one of them. And every single one of them is going to tell you the exact same thing because it's the exact same truth. But they're going to do it with a lawyer present and with a record that can't be edited, because I've seen what happens to statements that get taken from tired men in a hurry." He turned to the team, sweeping his gaze across every face. "You hear me? You tell the truth, all of it. But you don't sign one word today, and you don't let anybody put words in your mouth. That's an order, and I'm the senior man in this room, so it stands." Hayes looked up, and relief washed over his face. "Copy that, Chief." But Brooks did not look up. Reynolds saw it. He went to the boy, lowered himself onto the bed beside him with the grunt, and dropped his voice so only the 2 of them could hear. "Noah, look at me." The boy looked up. His eyes were red. "They said," he started and his voice broke. "They said if I cooperate, if I confirm the commander disobeyed orders, that I'm protected, that it'll go easier on everybody. They said the outcome's already decided and I should think about myself." He was shaking. "Chief, I'm scared. I just want to go home. I can't lose everything." Reynolds felt a slow, cold anger fill him. So that was the play. Isolate the youngest, the most frightened, the one who had been through the worst, and offer him a lifeboat in exchange for a lie. "Noah," Reynolds said quietly, "you remember what you said on the runway this morning? In front of the colonel, in front of everybody, when you couldn't stop shaking. You said she went back for you. You said nobody gets left. You remember saying that?" The boy nodded, tears spilling over. "That took more courage than anything I've seen in 20 years, Reynolds said. A frightened kid hurt worse than any of us, standing up in front of the man who had all the power and telling the truth anyway. That was the bravest thing on that flight line, Noah. Braver than what I did. Braver than what any of us did." He put his good hand on the boy's shoulder. "Now they want you to take it back. They want you to say she left the chain of command, that she went rogue, that she's the reason. And I'm going to tell you something Emily told me an hour ago in a cell with everything stripped away from her. She said being brave isn't not being scared. It's being scared out of your mind and doing the right thing anyway." Brooks's chest heaved. "You're scared right now," Reynolds said. "That's fine. Fear's fine. But you already know what the right thing is. You said it out loud this morning when it counted most. So the only question is whether you're going to let a frightened afternoon erase your brave morning." For a long moment, the boy said nothing. Then he wiped his face with the back of his hand, and he sat up a little straighter, and he looked across the room at the investigator who had been working on him. "I'm not signing anything," Brooks said. His voice still shook, but it did not break. "And you can write down that I said Commander Carter saved my life." Write that down, word for word. Reynolds felt his throat tighten. He squeezed the boy's shoulder once and stood. The investigator's jaw went tight. He looked around the room and he understood finally that there was no crack here to pry open. 14 men wounded and exhausted, and not one of them would break. He gathered his tablet and gestured to his partner, and the two of them left without another word, brushing past Lieutenant Pratt at the door. When they were gone, the wing was quiet for a moment. And then Hayes started to laugh, that same bitter, defiant laugh from the runway, and one by one the others joined him, and it turned into something almost like relief. 14 men who had refused together to abandon the woman who had refused to abandon them. Reynolds looked over at Pratt, who was still standing by the door, white as a sheet. "You told the colonel it'd be this afternoon," Reynolds said quietly. "He moved it up," Pratt said just as quietly. "An hour ago. He didn't tell me why. He just said, get them in here and get statements." Pratt's eyes were wide. "Chief, he's rattled. I've never seen him rattled. Something's got him scared, and a scared colonel is going to start swinging at anything that moves." "I know what's got him scared," Reynolds said. "What?" "The truth's about to come out of a machine," Reynolds said, "and there's nothing he can do to stop it." He hoped that was true. He hoped David Morgan was moving fast. Because Whitaker moving up the timeline meant Whitaker sensed the walls closing, and a man like that cornered would not go quietly. In the communications section, Sergeant Doyle stood at attention in front of Whitaker's desk, and he did not like the questions he was being asked. "The command channel archive," Whitaker said, "for the operation 3 days ago. I want to know the retention protocol. I want to know who has access. And I want to know how a file gets flagged for a security hold." Doyle chose his words carefully. "Sir, the command channel recordings wrote to Central Repository. It's automatic. It's federal protocol. I don't have delete access to that archive. Nobody on this base does. That's the point of it. I didn't ask you to delete it." "No, sir. I asked how a file gets flagged for a security hold. Pending investigation, national security concerns, that kind of thing." Doyle felt his stomach drop because he understood all at once exactly what he was being asked to help with. He understood that a colonel who was supposed to have welcomed a returning team home was instead sitting here trying to find a way to make an audio file disappear into a bureaucratic black hole. And Doyle was not a hero. He was a communications sergeant 3 years from retirement. But he was also a man with a conscience, and something about this was setting off every alarm he had. "Sir," he said slowly, "a security hold would have to be requested through proper channels with justification, and it would be logged. Everyone would see it was requested and by whom." He paused. "If a file's going to be sealed, sir, there'd be a record of who asked to seal it." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. He heard the warning in it, and he did not like it. "Are you refusing an order, Sergeant?" "I haven't been given an order, sir. You asked me how the process works. I'm telling you. Anything you request leaves a trail." Doyle held his ground, though his heart was pounding. "With respect, Colonel, if there's nothing on that recording that concerns you, there'd be no reason to seal it. And if there is something on its sealing, it is going to look like exactly what it is." The two men stared at each other across the desk. And Whitaker realized in that moment that he was more alone than he had thought. He had assumed the base was his, that its people were extensions of his authority. But the sergeant in front of him was looking at him like he was something to be careful of. The team would not break. The lieutenant had been slow. And now this. The walls were not just closing. They had never been as solid as he believed. "Dismissed," Whitaker said coldly. Doyle saluted and left faster than he should have, and the moment he was clear of the office, he pulled out his phone. Because a man with a conscience, once he sees clearly what he is standing next to, does not always stay silent. He did not know David Morgan, but he knew that what he had just witnessed was wrong, and he knew that somewhere in the system there were people who investigated exactly this kind of wrong. Whitaker sat alone in his office, and for the first time, real fear began to work its way into his chest. He had built his entire plan on one assumption, that he controlled the story. That reality was whatever the ranking officer said it was. He had relieved Carter, staged the arrest, ordered the statements, moved the timeline, and every one of those moves had been designed to lock in his version before anyone could question it. But the story was not his. It had never been his. It belonged to a machine that had recorded his voice, and to 14 men who would not lie, and to a woman sitting in a cell who had already seen 3 moves past him. He picked up the phone again. He needed to reach someone with the authority to bury that file, someone who owed him someone from the old days. He started dialing. He did not know that at that exact moment in Washington, David Morgan was sitting in front of a secure terminal watching a progress bar crawl across the screen as a certified copy of the Command Channel archive downloaded to a drive that Whitaker would never be able to touch. He did not know that the file was already out of his reach. He did not know that in a few short hours his own voice was going to play in a room full of senior officers, flat and cold and damning, saying the words extraction denied weather restriction. In effect, follow the order on a night when there had been no weather and no restriction and no reason at all except a man's decision to leave 14 soldiers to die. Emily Carter sat in her cell and she waited, and she did not know how Reynolds was doing, or whether Morgan had the file, or whether Whitaker was even now succeeding in burying the one piece of proof that could save her. She only knew that she had done everything she could from inside four gray walls. She had done the thinking. She had made the call. She had trusted her people. The door opened. She looked up, expecting a guard, expecting Reynolds, expecting anything but what she saw. It was a woman she did not recognize in the uniform of the Inspector General's office, holding a folder and wearing an expression that Emily could not read. "Commander Carter," the woman said. "My name is Major Sarah Lindqvist. I'm with the Office of the Inspector General." She stepped into the room and set the folder on the metal table. "I need to ask you some questions, and before I do, I want you to know something." She paused. "A file was flagged to my office an hour ago, a Command Channel recording. Someone in Washington moved it to a priority review, and someone on this base tried to have it sealed at almost the same moment." Her eyes met Emily's. When two people fight that hard over the same piece of audio, one to protect it and one to bury it, my office tends to want to know what's on it. Emily's heart began to pound. "Have you listened to it?" she asked. Major Lindqvist looked at her for a long moment. "I'm about to," she said, "and I'd like you to be in the room when I do." They moved Emily out of the cell and down a corridor to a secure conference room, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, no one had a hand on her arm. Major Sarah Lindqvist walked beside her, not behind her, and that small thing told Emily more than any words could have. She was no longer being treated like a prisoner. She was being treated like a witness. Whether she was about to become a vindicated one or a doomed one depended entirely on what came out of a speaker in the next few minutes. Lindqvist set a laptop on the table and connected it to a small, encrypted drive. "This is a certified copy," she said, "pulled from central repository chain of custody, documented, verified against the original hash. Whatever we're about to hear, no one can claim it was edited because the file itself carries proof it wasn't." She looked at Emily. "Do you understand what that means, Commander?" "It means if it says what I think it says," Emily said quietly, "he can't argue with it. That's exactly what it means." Emily's heart was hammering, but her face stayed still. She had learned long ago to carry the fear where no one could see it, but underneath a terrible doubt had crept in during the walk down the corridor. What if the file was incomplete? What if the crucial words had been lost in a comms dropout? What if 17 days of holding her team together came down to a recording that cut out at the worst possible second? She had built everything on the certainty that the machine had been listening, but she had not heard it yet, and until she did, nothing was certain. "Before you play it," Emily said, "I want to say one thing for the record." Lindqvist paused, her finger over the keyboard. "Go ahead." "I never broke the chain of command. I want that clear. I refused an order that would have killed 14 people, and I invoked an alternate authorization to do it, and I documented every step out loud on an open channel because I knew a day like this might come." Emily met her eyes. "I didn't go rogue, Major. I went by the book. It just wasn't his book." Lindqvist studied her. "We'll know in about 30 seconds whether that's true." And she pressed play. For a moment, there was only static, the empty hiss of a channel waiting. Emily's chest tightened. Then cutting through came her own voice, 3 days old, flat, and controlled the way she had trained herself to sound when everything was falling apart. "Command, this is Carter. We are pinned on the ridge, taking fire from 2 directions. I have wounded, I say again, I have wounded. Requesting emergency extraction, over." The room was dead silent. Lindqvist did not move. Static, a pause that stretched too long, and then a second voice, and Emily felt the hair rise on her arms because it was unmistakable. Calm, unbothered. The voice of a man who was not standing where the bullets were. Carter, this is command. Extraction denied. Weather restriction in effect. Hold position and follow the order over. Emily heard her own voice come back tighter now, the discipline audibly straining. Command negative on weather. Skies are clear. I have visual on stars. There is no restriction in the system. I have checked every channel. If we hold this position, we will not survive the night. Requesting you reconsider. Emergency extraction over. And then Whitaker's voice again, and this time there was an edge to it, an impatience, the sound of a man who did not want to be questioned. Carter, the restriction stands. Hold position. That is a direct order. Follow command authority out. The recording hissed, and then Emily's voice one more time, low and even, speaking not to command, but to her own team. And this was the part she had forgotten, was captured, the part that made Lindqvist's hand come up slowly to cover her mouth. All stations, this is Carter. Be advised, I am invoking emergency alternate extraction authorization under independent protocol. I am documenting that the primary extraction was denied, citing a weather restriction that does not exist in any system I can access. I am making this call to preserve the lives of my team. The responsibility is mine. Time hack follows. Execute. The file ended. The silence in the room was total. Emily realized she was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to hurt. She made herself let go. She looked at Lindqvist, and she could not read the Major's expression, and for one agonizing second she did not know if she had just been saved or if it somehow impossibly was not enough. Then Lindqvist spoke, and her voice was very quiet. He said there was a weather restriction. There wasn't, Emily said. You said so, right there in the moment. On the record, you checked every channel. Lindqvist's eyes were hard now, but the hardness was not aimed at Emily. And he repeated it twice. He doubled down. He gave you a direct order to hold a position you told him would kill your team, and he justified it with a restriction that this recording proves you challenged in real time. Emily's throat was tight. Yes. Lindqvist sat back. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she said something that changed everything. Commander, I've reviewed a lot of these. Men make bad calls under pressure. They panic, they freeze, they misjudge. That happens, and it's tragic, but it's human, and sometimes it's not even punishable. She tapped the drive. This is not that. A bad call is a man denying extraction because he genuinely believes there's a weather system. This is a man denying extraction and inventing a weather system to justify it. Those are not the same thing. One is an error. The other is a lie told to cover a decision. She looked at Emily, and a lie changes everything. Emily felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched for 17 days. But she did not let herself feel relief yet, because she knew Whitaker, and she knew that a man who had planned all of this so carefully would not simply surrender because a recording existed. He's going to fight this, Emily said. Of course he is. He's going to say the recording's out of context. He's going to say there was intelligence. I didn't have access to some reason for the restriction that was above my clearance. He's going to say he was protecting the aircrew, that he made a hard call, and I made it personal. Emily leaned forward. Major, he filed charges against me before he knew if we were alive. That's the part you need to chase down. Not just what he said on the ridge, when he moved against me. Because if he filed before he knew the outcome, then this was never about a failed mission. It was about silencing a witness. Lindqvist went very still. You have proof of that timeline. The charges are time-stamped. So is the flight. So is the moment we established contact after extraction. Emily's voice was steady and cold. Line them up. You'll see it. He started building my prison before he knew whether I'd survive to be put in it. Lindqvist looked at her for a long moment, and then she pulled the folder toward her and opened it, and Emily saw her own name across the top of an official charge sheet. The Major's finger went to a line at the bottom. A date. A time. This was filed, Lindqvist said slowly, at 0642. Emily's pulse jumped. When did we reestablish contact with base? After the alternate extraction pulled us off the ridge. Lindqvist flipped it to another page, ran her finger down, stopped, and Emily watched the blood drain from the Major's face. 0815, Lindqvist said. The room went silent again, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of two people looking at the same terrible fact. He filed the charges against you, Lindqvist said slowly, An hour and 33 minutes before anyone at this base had confirmation your team was even alive. Emily said nothing. She let the number hang there. She had known it in her gut since the runway, but hearing it confirmed on paper in an official record was something else entirely. He didn't file because you disobeyed, Lindqvist said almost to herself. He couldn't have known the outcome of your disobedience yet. The extraction had happened, but base hadn't confirmed status. For all he officially knew at 0642, you could all have been dead on that ridge. She looked up. He filed because you challenged his order on a recorded channel. He filed because you said the words "no weather restriction" exists out loud where it would be captured. He wasn't punishing a rogue commander. He was neutralizing a witness before she could talk. Yes, Emily said quietly. That's exactly what he was doing. Lindqvist closed the folder. Her hands were not quite steady. Commander, I've been doing this work for 11 years. I have seen officers cut corners. I have seen them cover mistakes. I have never seen anything this deliberate. She stood. I need to take this up the chain immediately. This is no longer a question of whether you disobeyed an order. This is a question of what Colonel Whitaker did and why and how far it goes. How far it goes, Emily repeated. What do you mean? Lindqvist paused at the door, and what she said next opened a door Emily had not even known was there. A man doesn't invent a weather restriction on the spot, cold under pressure, and deliver it that smoothly the first time, Lindqvist said. That kind of lie has practice behind it. I've seen it before, Commander. When a person covers something this cleanly, it's usually not the first time they have had to cover something. She looked at Emily. I'm going to pull Whitaker's operational history. Every mission he's commanded, every extraction request that came across his desk. Because if he was willing to do this to you and lie about it this smoothly, then I want to know who came before you. I want to know who didn't have a recording. I want to know who didn't come home. And with that, she was gone. Emily sat alone in the conference room, and the weight of Lindqvist's last words settled over her. Who came before you? Who didn't come home? She had been so focused on surviving Whitaker's attack that she had never once stopped to ask whether she was the first. And now that the question had been asked, she could not unask it. Across the base, Colonel Jonathan Whitaker was learning in real time that his world was coming apart. The call he had been making, the one to an old ally with the authority to bury a file, had not gone the way he wanted. The voice on the other end had been cautious, evasive, and then it had said the words that turned Whitaker's stomach to ice. John, there's already a priority flag on that file. Inspector General's office. It came through this morning. Whatever this is, it's already moving, and I'm not putting my name anywhere near it. The line had gone dead. Whitaker sat with the receiver in his hand, listening to the dial tone, and for the first time he understood the shape of what was happening to him. The recording was not just out of his reach, it was already in the hands of the one office he could not control, the one office whose entire purpose was to investigate men like him. Someone had moved it there. Someone had known to move it there, and it had happened while he was still congratulating himself on a clean operation. Carter. She had done it from inside a cell, stripped of everything. She had reached out through some channel he had not thought to close, and she had put the one weapon that could destroy him into the hands of the one person who would use it. He had underestimated her. He saw that now. He had looked at her on that runway, exhausted and filthy and beaten, and he had seen a problem to be disposed of. He had not seen what she actually was. A commander who thought 3 moves ahead. A commander who had documented everything out loud on the record because she had anticipated a day exactly like this one. Whitaker's hand tightened on the receiver. He was not a man who surrendered. He had spent a career learning that reality bent to whoever pushed hardest. And he was not done pushing. If he could not bury the file, he would attack its meaning. He would build context around it. He would produce a justification for the weather call, some after-the-fact intelligence rationale, some classified concern that only he had been privy to. He would turn a lie into a judgment call, and a judgment call was survivable. He picked up the phone to summon his aide to begin constructing his defense. And that was when the door to his office opened without a knock. Major Sarah Lindqvist stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 officers Whitaker did not recognize, and she was holding a folder, and her face was carved from stone. Colonel Whitaker, she said, I'm Major Lindqvist, Office of the Inspector General. I need you to step away from the phone. Whitaker set it down slowly. He arranged his face into the mask of an offended senior officer. Major, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm in the middle of managing a serious disciplinary matter regarding a commander who challenged you on a recorded channel, Lindqvist said, and whom you filed charges against at 6:42, an hour and a half before this base confirmed her team was alive. The words hit Whitaker like a physical thing. He did not flinch, but Lindqvist saw the flicker in his eyes, the tiny crack, and she knew she had him. That timeline, Whitaker said carefully, has an explanation. I'm sure you'll construct one, Lindqvist said. Men like you always do. But you should understand something before you start. She stepped into the office. I've heard the recording, Colonel, all of it. I've heard you deny extraction. I've heard you cite a weather restriction. And I've heard Commander Carter tell you in real time on the record. No such restriction existed in any system she could access. And then I've heard you repeat the lie anyway. She held his gaze. So whatever explanation you're building, it has to account for the fact that your own voice contradicts you. Whitaker's jaw tightened, and now the practiced calm began to slip and something colder showed underneath it. You have no idea what pressures a commander operates under. You sit in an office and you second-guess split-second decisions as made with incomplete information. There were considerations that woman was not clear to understand. Then tell me what they were, Lindqvist said. Right now, what was the intelligence that justified the weather restriction? Give me the source. Give me the classification. Give me the document. She waited. Whitaker said nothing. There's nothing, is there? There was never any restriction. You invented it because you had decided that unit was expendable, and you didn't want to send an aircrew after them, and you thought they'd all die on that ridge, and there'd be no one left to contradict you. That is a fantasy, Whitaker said, but his voice had lost something. Is it? Lindqvist opened her folder. Because I've spent the last hour pulling your operational history, Colonel. And I found something. 14 months ago, a different unit, a different ridge, so to speak. An extraction request that came across your desk and was denied. She looked up. 3 men on that mission didn't come home. The report attributed it to enemy action and adverse conditions. Adverse conditions, Colonel. I'm going to be pulling that command channel recording too, and I have a feeling I'm going to hear something very familiar. The office went absolutely silent, and Emily Carter's words came back to Lindqvist, the words that had sent her digging. When a person covers something this cleanly, it's usually not the first time. She had been right. Emily had been right. This was not a man who had panicked once. This was a pattern. This was a man who had learned that he could leave people behind and call it weather, and that the dead do not file complaints, and that he could do it again and again, as long as no one survived to say otherwise. Emily was simply the first one who had come home. Whitaker had gone pale. The mask was gone now, and what was left underneath was not a firm commander or a wrong senior officer. It was a frightened man who had built his entire life on the belief that authority was the same as truth, and who was watching that belief crumble in real time. You can't prove any of that, he said, and his voice was thin. I proved the first one in an hour, Lindqvist said. Give me a day for the second. She nodded to the 2 officers behind her. Colonel Jonathan Whitaker, you are relieved of command effective immediately pending formal investigation by the Office of the Inspector General. You'll surrender your access and remain available for questioning. It was the exact thing he had said to Emily on the runway that morning. The exact words turned around and handed back to him, and everyone in the room felt the terrible symmetry of it. Whitaker looked at the officers moving toward him, and for a moment Emily's calm dignity on that flight line flashed through the room's memory like an accusation. She had faced this with her spine straight and her voice steady, thinking only of her wounded men. Whitaker faced it very differently. He gripped the edge of his desk, and his composure fractured, and what came out of him was not dignity, but panic. You don't understand, he said. The decisions I made saved resources, saved aircrew. You can't send a bird into every hopeless situation. Sometimes a commander has to accept losses. That's the job. That's the job nobody wants to talk about. His voice was rising. Carter got lucky. She got lucky. And now everyone wants to call me a monster for making the hard calls that keep this force functioning. 3 men 14 months ago didn't get lucky, Lindqvist said quietly. And you didn't call it a hard loss, Colonel. You called it weather. You lied on the record so you'd never have to answer for the choice. That's not accepting the cost of command. That's hiding from it. Whitaker had no answer for that. They walked him out of his own office, and word moved through the base faster than anyone could have carried it the way it always does. And by the time he was escorted down the corridor, there were people watching quietly from doorways. Sergeant Doyle, who had refused to help seal the file, stood at attention and watched him pass and felt no satisfaction, only a grim relief that he had trusted his conscience. Lieutenant Pratt, still holding his clipboard, watched the man he had feared that very morning walk by stripped of every ounce of the power that had made him frightening. And in the conference room when Major Linkfist returned, Emily Carter looked up and she read the answer in the Major's face before a single word was spoken. "It's over," Linkfist said. "Unbekemesen." He's relieved. The Inspector General is opening a full formal review. She paused. "And Commander, you were right about all of it. The timeline, the lay, and the fact that you weren't the first." Her voice grew quiet. "There was a mission 14 months ago. 3 men. I'm going to be reviewing it very closely." Emily sat very still, and the relief she had been holding back for 17 days did not come as she expected it to in a flood of joy. It came instead as something heavier and quieter, because she was not the first. And that meant that everything she had survived, everything her team had endured, had happened because no one before her had come home to tell the truth. 3 men, Emily said softly. 3 men. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was something new in them, a resolve that went far beyond her own vindication. "Then this doesn't end with him being relieved," she said. "It doesn't end with me getting my command back. Those 3 men have families who were told their sons died in adverse conditions. Those families deserve to know the truth. And every unit that ever operates under a commander like him deserves to know that when they call for help, someone is going to come, and if someone refuses, there's a machine that remembers, and there are people who will listen." Linkfist looked at her for a long moment. "You've been through hell, Commander. Most people in your position would just want to go home and put it behind them." Emily thought of Noah Brooks standing on the runway that morning, shaking, telling the truth in front of the man who could destroy him. She thought of Reynolds dragging himself out of a hospital bed. She thought of every face she had counted on that aircraft alive, all 14, because she had refused to follow one order. "I don't get to put it behind me," Emily said. "Not while there are families out there who buried men because of a lie nobody caught. Somebody has to make sure this never happens again. Might as well be the one person who has proof it happened at all." Linkfist nodded slowly, and something like respect settled over her features. "Then let's make sure it never happens again," she said. And somewhere in an archive hundreds of miles away, in a system no commander could control, a 14-month-old recording waited in the dark, ready to give up its secret, ready to speak in a voice that 3 grieving families had never known to listen for. The recording from 14 months ago did not come easily. Major Linkfist requested it that same afternoon, and by evening she had learned that Whitaker had not been careless the way he had been with Emily. The file existed, it was in central repository, like all the others, but the mission report attached to it had been written with a craftsman's care. Adverse conditions. Enemy action. A denied extraction reframed as a tactical impossibility. Everything on paper agreed with everything else on paper. The only thing that disagreed was the audio, and the audio had never been played by anyone who had a reason to doubt the story. Until now, Linkfist came to Emily the next morning, and she did not look like a woman who had slept. She sat down across from her in the same conference room where they had heard Whitaker's voice deny the ridge, and she set a drive on the table, and for a moment she did not say anything at all. "You listened to it," Emily said. "I listened to it." And Linkfist was quiet. When she spoke, her voice was careful, the voice of a person handling something that might break. "There were 3 men, a reconnaissance element cut off taking casualties. The team leader was a staff sergeant named Elias Turner, 29 years old." She paused. "He requested extraction 4 times, Commander. 4. The recording gets worse each time. By the last request, you can hear gunfire behind his voice. You can hear him breathing hard, and you can hear Whitaker." Emily's hands were still on the table. "What did Whitaker say?" "The same thing that Linkfist said, almost word for word. Extraction denied, adverse conditions. Hold position. Follow the order." Her jaw tightened. The difference is that Staff Sergeant Turner didn't have an alternate channel, or didn't know he could invoke it, or didn't have the seconds to try. The recording ends with him acknowledging the order. Roger holding position out. That's the last thing on the file. That's the last anyone ever heard from him. The room was silent. Emily closed her eyes. She had asked to know. She had insisted on it. And now she carried it, the sound she had not heard, but could imagine perfectly a young man acknowledging an order he must have known would kill him because he trusted the chain of command to have a reason. He obeyed, Emily said quietly. He obeyed. That's the part that gets me. Emily opened her eyes and they were wet and hard. He did everything right. He followed the order like he was trained to. He trusted that the man on the other end of that radio was telling the truth about the conditions. And that trust is what killed him. She looked at Lindqvist. The system worked exactly the way it's supposed to. A soldier obeyed a lawful order from a superior officer. Except the order wasn't based on truth. It was based on a lie. And a lie dressed up as a lawful order will kill good men every single time because good men obey. That's why you didn't, Lindqvist said. It was not a question. That's why I didn't, Emily said. I'd read the reports. Not that one I never knew about Turner, but others like it. Extractions denied men lost everything neat on paper. Somewhere in the back of my head, I'd already decided that if a day came where the order and the truth didn't match, I was going to follow the truth and account for it afterward. I just never thought the day would actually come. She was quiet a moment. Turner probably never thought it would come either. The difference between us isn't courage. It's that I got a warning he never did, and I got seconds he didn't have, and I got an alternate channel he wasn't briefed on. He's not less of a soldier than me. He's just less lucky. Lindqvist looked at her for a long time. There's something you need to understand about what happens next, she said finally. This is bigger than a relief of command now. Bigger than your case. If the second recording holds up, and I have no reason to think it won't, then we're looking at a pattern of falsified orders resulting in loss of life. That's not a disciplinary matter, that's criminal. And it means people above Whitaker are going to start asking how a commander did this twice 14 months apart and nobody caught it. Her eyes were steady, which means some of those people are going to want it to stay quiet. Not because they're guilty, because it's embarrassing. Because a scandal like this makes an entire command structure look blind. Emily understood immediately. They'll want to bury Turner along with Whitaker. They'll want to settle it fast and clean. Relieve Whitaker, maybe charge him, but keep the 14-month-old case sealed as a separate matter, quiet resolved internally, no families notified, no public record. Lindqvist's voice was flat. It's the path of least damage to the institution, and institutions almost always choose the path of least damage to themselves. Emily felt the old cold anger rising again, the same anger that had filled her on that ridge. Turner's family was told he died in adverse conditions. Yes, they've spent 14 months believing he died because the weather turned and there was nothing anyone could do. They grieved him as a man the mission couldn't save. Emily's voice was very quiet and very dangerous. And the truth is, he died because a colonel decided he wasn't worth the fuel and lied about it. And now there are people who'd rather that family keep believing the comfortable lie because the truth is inconvenient. That's what we're up against, Lindqvist said. Emily was silent for a moment. Then she said, not if it's already public. Lindqvist's eyes sharpened. Be careful what you're suggesting, Commander. You leak a classified recording, even one that exonerates you, and you hand Whitaker's defenders exactly what they need. Reckless commander disregards protocol, does it again. You become the story instead of him. I'm not talking about leaking anything, Emily said. I'm talking about testimony, on the record, in a formal proceeding under oath where it becomes part of a permanent account that can't be quietly sealed. I'm talking about General Anderson. Lindqvist paused. Michael Anderson. You know him? Everyone knows him. He's one of the few senior commanders left who came up the hard way, who actually led men in the field before he wore stars. Lindqvist considered it. He has the authority to convene a review that can't be swept aside. But Commander, he's also exactly the kind of man who could decide the institution matters more than one family's grief. Men at that level didn't get there by making things difficult for the people above them. Then let's find out which kind of man he is, Emily said. Because if he's the kind who'd bury Turner to protect the institution, I'd rather know that now. And if he's the kind who came up the hard way and still remembers what it feels like to call for help and pray someone answers, then he's exactly who we need. Lindqvist studied her. You'd stake everything on that. Your reinstatement is basically guaranteed at this point. The Ridge recording clears you completely. You could walk away clean today. Instead, you want to walk into a general's office and force him to choose between doing the right thing and doing the easy thing, and you have no idea which way he'll go. Emily thought about it honestly. She thought about how close she was to simply being done, to getting her command back, to going home. All she had to do was stay quiet about a dead man she had never met, and she knew she could not do it. I counted 14 faces coming off that helicopter, Emily said. I've counted them every day for 17 days, and now I know there were 3 faces 14 months ago that nobody counted because the man who was supposed to bring them home decided they weren't worth counting. She met Lindqvist's eyes. I don't get to walk away clean while Elias Turner's family thinks he died in the weather. That's not a clean I could live with. Lindqvist was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, and there was something in her face that had not been there before, something that looked like the beginning of an alliance. I'll set up the meeting with Anderson, she said. But Commander, understand this. Once you say Turner's name in that room, you can't take it back. If Anderson wants it buried, you've just made yourself a problem for a general. And generals have long memories. So do I, Emily said. Set up the meeting. 2 days later, Emily walked into General Michael Anderson's office, reinstated to her command, her rank restored, her weapon and badge returned. The Ridge recording had done exactly what she knew it would. Whitaker was gone, facing formal charges, his career finished. Her team had been cleared and commended. By every measure, she had won, and she was about to risk it all on a dead man's name. Anderson was older than she expected, gray and weathered, with the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors and under pressure. He did not smile when she entered. He gestured to a chair and he watched her sit, and for a moment he simply studied her the way an old commander studies a subordinate he has heard a great deal about. Commander Carter, he said, you've had an interesting week. Yes, sir. You were arrested on a flight line, stripped of command, thrown in a cell, and 8 days later you're sitting in my office, fully reinstated with the man who did it to you facing a court-martial. Anderson leaned back. That's the kind of turnaround that usually only happens in the movies. And it happened because you had the presence of mind in the middle of a firefight to document everything you did out loud on a recorded channel. That's not luck. That's a commander who thinks past the moment she's in. He nodded slowly. I've read the file. I've heard the Ridge recording. What you did out there, refusing that order to save your people and doing it by the book so it would hold up, that's about as fine a piece of command judgment as I've seen in a long time. Thank you, sir. So, Anderson folded his hands, you could be home right now. You've been through hell and you've come out the other side vindicated. Instead, you asked Major Lindqvist to arrange this meeting, and she told me it concerns a matter from 14 months ago. His eyes did not leave her face. I have a feeling you're about to complicate your own happy ending, Commander. So let's hear it. Why are you in my office instead of on leave with your family? And there it was, the moment. Emily could feel the 2 paths in front of her, the easy one and the hard one, as clearly as she had felt them on the Ridge. She took the hard one. Sir, when Major Lindqvist reviewed Colonel Whitaker's operational history, she found something. 14 months ago, a reconnaissance element under his command was cut off and requested extraction. A staff sergeant named Elias Turner. He requested extraction 4 times. Emily kept her voice steady. Whitaker denied every request. He cited adverse conditions. The mission report attributes the loss of Turner and 2 of his men to those conditions and to enemy action. She paused. There's a command channel recording, sir. I've been told what's on it. Whitaker used almost the exact same words he used on me. Extraction denied. Hold position. Follow the order. The difference is that Turner obeyed, and Turner and his men died, and their families were told it was the weather. The office was completely silent. Anderson's face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. Emily could not read it. She did not know if she had just found an ally or made an enemy. She kept going because there was no stopping now. His family buried him, believing the mission couldn't save him, sir. Believing he died in conditions no one could control. And the truth is he died because a commander decided 3 men weren't worth an aircrew and then lied on the record to make sure no one would ever ask. Emily held the general's gaze. I know what happens next, sir. I know there's going to be pressure to keep the Turner matter quiet. To resolve Whitaker's case on the Ridge alone, clean and contained, and leave 14 months ago sealed. Because opening it means admitting a man did this twice and no one caught it, and that's embarrassing for a lot of people. I understand the logic of that. I even understand why it might feel like the responsible thing to do. She paused. But I couldn't sit here and let it happen without telling you to your face that Elias Turner's family deserves the truth. Whatever it costs, whatever it embarrasses. They deserve to know their son obeyed an order like the soldier he was trained to be, and that the man who gave that order lied to him. She finished, and she waited. Anderson said nothing for a long time. He looked at her, and then he looked past her at the wall at nothing, and Emily watched a man who had spent 40 years in uniform wrestle with something in the silence. She could not tell which way it would go. She had gambled everything on the chance that under the stars on his shoulders, there was still a man who remembered the field. When Anderson finally spoke, his voice was rough. I had a call this morning, he said, and before you got here, 2 calls actually, from people who outrank me or think they do. Both of them said more or less the same thing. He looked at her. They said the Whitaker situation is being handled. The Ridge case is clean, the commander who caused the problem is being dealt with, and there's no need to go digging into old operations and stirring up matters that are already closed. One of them used the phrase institutional stability. His mouth twisted slightly. They wanted to make sure I understood the wisdom of a contained resolution before anyone started pulling threads. Emily's heart sank. So the pressure had already begun before she had even said Turner's name. It was worse than Linkfist had feared. I see, sir, she said quietly. Do you? Anderson leaned forward, and now there was heat in his voice. Let me tell you what I heard on those calls, Commander. I heard 2 men who have forgotten what this uniform is for. I heard people worried about how it looks that a colonel got away with murder for 14 months, worried enough that they'd rather it stay quiet than fix it. His jaw was tight. I came up through reconnaissance commander a long time ago in a place I don't talk about much. I was a young sergeant cut off with my team, and I called for extraction. And I want you to know something. Somebody came. Somebody flew into a situation they had every reason to call hopeless, and they pulled us out, and I have spent my entire career trying to be worthy of the fact that somebody came. His voice dropped. And now I've got people telling me to look the other way while it comes out that a commander decided nobody would come twice and lied about it. And they want me to help keep it quiet for the good of the institution. He stood up. He walked to the window and he was quiet for a moment. The institution, he said, is not the thing on the letterhead. The institution is the promise. The promise that when you call somebody, answers. That's the whole thing, Commander. That's the entire foundation everything else stands on. Every soldier who's ever gone into a bad place has gone in believing that promise. Turner believed it. He obeyed an order to hold a hopeless position because he trusted the promise that the man giving the order was telling him the truth. Anderson turned around. And when you protect a lie to keep the institution from being embarrassed, you're not protecting the institution. You're destroying the one thing that makes it worth protecting. You're telling every soldier out there that the promise is negotiable, that sometimes nobody comes, and worse, that when nobody comes, we'll cover it up to save face. Emily's throat was tight. Then, sir, Elias Turner's family gets the truth, Anderson said. All of it. And I'll be the one to make sure it happens, and I'll be the one those 2 callers this morning come after and let them come. I've got nothing left to lose but my honor, and I'm not spending that to protect men who forgot what the job is. He looked at her, and something in his weathered face softened. You knew I might bury it. You knew, and you came in here and said his name anyway. Why? Emily thought about it. Because someone had to say it out loud, she said. Turner obeyed a lie because he trusted the chain of command. The least I could do was trust it back one more time and hope there was someone in it who'd do the right thing. She paused. You could have been the man who buried him, sir. I took the chance you'd be the man who came. Same as somebody took a chance on you a long time ago. Anderson was quiet. And then slowly the old general did something Emily did not expect. He came around the desk and he stood in front of her and he extended his hand. Commander Carter, he said, in 40 years I've met a lot of officers who were brave. I've met fewer who were brave when the danger was to themselves and the safe move was right there for the taking. You had your win. You could have gone home. Instead, you walked in here to fight for a man you never met against, pressure that could have ended your career on nothing but the hope that I'd have the decency to do my job. He gripped her hand hard. That's not just courage. That's the thing courage is supposed to be for. Emily stood and she took his hand, and for the first time in what felt like a very long time, she felt something unclench all the way down to the bottom of her. There's going to be a formal review, Anderson said. Both cases, the Ridge and Turner. It's going to be thorough, it's going to be on the record, and it's going to be impossible to quietly seal, because I'm going to make sure of that personally. He released her hand. And the Turner family is going to be notified, and they're going to hear the truth from someone who has the decency to look them in the eye when they say it. I'll do that myself too. That's not a job you hand off. Sir, Emily said, when you speak to them, tell them their son did everything right. Tell them he obeyed his orders like the soldier he was. Tell them the failure was never his. Her voice caught. He deserves to be remembered as a man who trusted the promise, not a man the weather beat. Anderson looked at her, and there was something wet in the old man's eyes now, too. I'll tell them exactly that, he said, word for word. And as Emily walked out of that office, reinstated, vindicated, and having risked all of it to force the truth into the light, she understood something she would carry for the rest of her life. She had thought the recording was the thing that saved her, the audio, the evidence, the machine that remembered. But the recording had only ever been proof. It could not decide anything on its own. It had taken people, a wounded chief who dragged himself to a phone, a frightened lieutenant who pointed toward a landline, a sergeant who refused to help seal a file, a boy who told the truth while he was shaking, a major who chose to pull an old thread instead of leaving it alone, and an old general who remembered what it felt like when somebody came. The truth did not save itself. People saved it one choice at a time, each of them scared each of them doing the right thing anyway. And 3 grieving families were finally about to learn that somebody at last had come for the truth about their sons. General Anderson kept his word, and it turned out that keeping it cost him exactly what he had said it would. Within a week, the 2 men who had called him about institutional stability made their displeasure known. Meetings were rescheduled without him. A committee he had chaired for years quietly found a new chair. The message was clear, delivered in the language men at that level always used, which was the language of things left unsaid. Anderson had made himself inconvenient, and inconvenient men found their paths narrowing. He did not care. And when Emily, hearing about it, came to his office to apologize for the cost he was paying, he waved her off before she could finish. "Commander, I want you to listen to me," he said. "I'm 63 years old. I've done the job. I've done it as well as I know how for 4 decades. And if the last thing I do in this uniform is force the truth out about a man who left soldiers to die, then I will retire the proudest I've ever been." He leaned back. "They can take my committees. They can take my invitations to the right dinners. They cannot take the fact that Elias Turner's mother is going to hear the truth from a man who looked her in the eye. That's worth more than every star they might have dangled in front of me for staying quiet. Don't you dare apologize for it." So Emily did not apologize again, but she did not forget either. The formal review convened 3 weeks after the Ridge, and it was everything Anderson had promised it would be. Thorough, on the record, impossible to seal. The Ridge recording was entered into evidence, played in full for a panel of senior officers who sat in absolute silence as Whitaker's own voice denied 14 soldiers the help they had begged for. And then the second recording was entered, the one from 14 months earlier, and the room heard Staff Sergeant Elias Turner request extraction 4 times, his voice steadier than it had any right to be, gunfire grunting behind him with each request, and they heard the same cold denial, and they heard the last thing anyone would ever hear from him. Roger holding position out. When that recording ended, one of the senior officers on the panel, a man who had sat through hundreds of proceedings without visible emotion, put his hand over his eyes and did not move for a long moment. Emily testified. She told them everything: the Ridge, the denial, the alternate channel, the decision she had made, and the reason she had made it. She did not embellish. She did not soften. She told the truth plainly, the way she had learned to give orders. And when they asked her the question she had known was coming, the same one Anderson had asked, why she had risked her restored career to raise the Turner case, when she could have walked away clean, she gave them the only answer she had. "Because I came home and he didn't," she said. "And the only difference between us was luck and a channel he was never briefed on. I couldn't take my life back, knowing his family had been handed a lie about his death. It's that simple. There wasn't a version of this where I walked away and could still look at myself." Whitaker was there too. He had lawyers, now good ones, and they fought the way good lawyers fight. They argued context. They argued the pressures of command. They argued that a commander must sometimes weigh the value of a rescue against the risk to the rescuers, and that reasonable officers could disagree about where that line fell. And for a while, in the careful language of the proceeding, it almost sounded like something a person could believe. Until the panel asked Whitaker the one question his lawyers could not answer for him. Colonel, you cited a weather restriction to Commander Carter on the ridge. You cited adverse conditions to Staff Sergeant Turner 14 months earlier. Provide the panel with the documentation for either restriction, the advisory, the source, the system entry, any record at all that these conditions existed. And Whitaker, who had built his entire career on the belief that authority was the same as truth, sat in front of that panel and had nothing. Because there was nothing. There had never been anything. The restrictions had lived only in his voice spoken into a radio he had forgotten, was listening, and now they hung in the air of that room with no ground beneath them at all. The conditions were a judgment call based on my assessment of the tactical picture, Whitaker said finally. A judgment call you described to two separate teams as a formal restriction, the panel officer said. Not a judgment, a restriction, a condition external to your judgment. You told those men the sky was closed. Was the sky closed, Colonel, yes or no? Was there a weather restriction? The silence stretched. No, Whitaker said at last, so quietly it barely carried. There was no formal restriction. So you lied to them. I made a decision I believed was correct, and I communicated it in terms I believed they would follow without argument. You lied to them, the officer repeated, so they would obey a decision they would have questioned if you'd told them the truth. Is that accurate? And Whitaker, cornered at last with no authority left to hide behind, no rank that mattered anymore, no story left to control, said the truest thing he had said in 14 months. Yes, he said, that's accurate. The room did not gasp. It did not need to. The words simply settled over everything final and complete, and Emily watched a lifetime of a man's carefully constructed reality collapse into a single admission. He had lied so that men would die quietly and obediently. He had said it himself out loud on the record. There was nowhere left for him to go. The panel's findings came down 2 weeks later. Colonel Jonathan Whitaker was found to have knowingly falsified operational orders, resulting in the deaths of Staff Sergeant Elias Turner and 2 members of his team, and to have attempted the same with Commander Carter's unit. The matter was referred for court-martial on charges that Emily did not let herself feel satisfaction over, because satisfaction was not the point and never had been. She did not go to watch when they finalized it. Reynolds asked her if she wanted to, and she told him no. You don't want to see him get what's coming, Reynolds asked. His shoulder was healing well now out of the sling, though he still favored it. I've seen enough of him to last a lifetime, Emily said. And this was never about watching him fall, Marcus. Men like him watching them fall doesn't fix anything. Turner's still gone. Those 2 men are still gone. Whitaker facing a court-martial doesn't bring them back. The only thing that matters now is the part that comes after. The part that comes after, Reynolds repeated. You mean the families? I mean the families. General Anderson had insisted on notifying Elias Turner's family himself, and he had insisted on doing it in person, and he had asked Emily if she would come with him. She had said yes without hesitation, and then had spent the 3 days before the trip more frightened than she had been on the ridge. Because a firefight she knew how to survive. She did not know how to walk into a mother's home and tell her that the story she had grieved for 14 months was a lie, that her son had not been beaten by conditions no one could control, but abandoned by a man who decided he wasn't worth the fuel. The Turner home was in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where a gold star in the window meant the whole community had mourned. Elias Turner's mother was named Ruth. She was a small woman with steel in her spine, and she opened the door and saw a general in dress uniform standing on her porch, and Emily beside him, and her face did something complicated, because a general at your door is never good news. And she had already had the worst news a mother can get. General, she said carefully, I don't understand. My son. That was 14 months ago. It's settled. We buried him. What is this, Mrs. Turner? Anderson said, and his voice was gentle in a way Emily had not heard from him before. My name is General Michael Anderson. This is Commander Emily Carter. May we come in? There's something you need to hear, and it's not a thing to say on a doorstep. She let them in. She sat them down. She offered coffee out of the reflex of a woman raised to be hospitable, even in the presence of the unknown. And Anderson accepted it because he understood that saying no would have taken something from her. And they sat in a living room with a folded flag on the mantel and photographs of a young man in uniform on every wall. And then General Anderson, 63 years old, 40 years in the service, who had faced enemy fire and hard commands and impossible decisions, did the hardest thing Emily had ever watched anyone do. He told a mother the truth. He told her that her son had not died in adverse conditions. He told her that Elias had requested extraction 4 times, that he had held his position and kept his men together and done everything a leader is supposed to do. He told her that the man who should have sent help had refused and had lied about the reason and had covered it up in a report that called a murder a misfortune. And he told her that her son had obeyed his final order the way a good soldier obeys, trusting that the man on the other end of the radio was telling him the truth. Ruth Turner listened to all of it without moving. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face did not crumble the way Emily had braced for. Instead, something harder happened, something worse, to watch a slow understanding settling into a woman who had spent 14 months making a kind of peace with a lie, and now had to tear that piece apart to make room for the truth. When Anderson finished, the room was silent for a long time. 14 months, Ruth said finally. Her voice was very quiet. For 14 months, I've been telling myself there was nothing anyone could do, that the weather turned, that the enemy was too strong, that God, just that it was his time. She looked up. I made my peace with that. I had to. A mother can't survive on anger, so I let it go. I told myself nobody was to blame. Her voice cracked just slightly. And now you're telling me there was somebody to blame the whole time. Yes, ma'am, Anderson said. I am. And my Elias, he called for help. 4 times. 4 times, ma'am. And nobody came. No, ma'am, nobody came. Anderson's voice was rough. And I want you to understand something, Mrs. Turner, because it matters and because your son earned it. He did nothing wrong, not one thing. He led his men the way we pray every leader will. He held his position because he was ordered to, and he trusted that order, and that trust is the finest thing about him, not the thing that failed him. The failure was never his. The failure belonged entirely to the man who lied to him. He leaned forward. Your son was not beaten by conditions, ma'am. Your son was a good soldier who was betrayed by a bad commander. And there is a world of difference between those two things, and you deserve to know which one is true. Ruth Turner was quiet, and then she looked at Emily, who had not yet spoken, who had been sitting with the weight of being the one who came home when Elias had not. And you, Ruth said, Commander Carter. Why are you here? The general, I understand, but you, what's your part in this? Emily's throat was tight. Mrs. Turner, 14 months after your son, the same commander, did the same thing to me and my team. He denied our extraction. He lied about the reason. The only difference is that I had a way out that your son was never given, and I took it, and my 14 people came home. She had to stop for a moment. I'm here because when I found out about your son, I couldn't let it stay buried. I have 14 people alive today because of a chance Elias never got. The least I owed him was to make sure his family knew the truth. He's the reason I'm sitting here, ma'am, in a way, because it could have been my mother getting this visit instead of you. It should have been by every odd. He didn't get the luck I got, so I made him a promise I never got to say to his face. I promised him somebody would come for the truth even if nobody came for him. Ruth Turner looked at her for a long, long moment, and then the steel in her spine gave way just a little, and she reached across and took Emily's hand, and she held it hard the way Reynolds had held hers in the cell, the way people hold on when words run out. Thank you, Ruth said. Her eyes were wet now finally, but her voice was steady. For coming, for not letting them keep it quiet. I heard you know. Even out here you hear things. I heard there was pressure to keep it all inside to handle it neat. She looked between them. You two fought that. You could have let my boy stay a comfortable story, and you didn't. No, ma'am, Anderson said. We didn't, and we never will. Then here's what I need from you. Ruth straightened, and now the steel was back, transformed into something with purpose. I don't want my son to be the reason a man goes to prison, and that's the end of it. That's not enough. Elias didn't die, so one bad colonel could be punished. If you want to honor my son, you make sure this can never happen to another mother's boy. You make sure that when a soldier calls for help and somebody says no, There's a way for the truth to come out that doesn't depend on luck. Because my Elias didn't have luck. And I don't ever want another mother to lose her son to a lie because the truth needed a miracle to surface. Her grip tightened on Emily's hand. You promised me that, Commander. You promised me you'll make it so the next Elias doesn't need to be lucky. And Emily Carter, who had made a promise to a dead man she never met, now made one to his living mother, and she meant it with everything she had. I promise you, she said, I will spend whatever it takes. Your son is going to change how this works, Mrs. Turner. He's going to be the reason it gets better. I give you my word. She kept it. It did not happen quickly because things like it never do. But Emily Carter restored to her command and now carrying a reputation that even the men who disliked her could not dismiss began to push. She used the Ridge recording and the Turner case as the twin foundations of an argument she made over and over to anyone who would listen and many who did not want to. The recordings had existed the entire time. The truth had been sitting in an archive for 14 months, complete, undeniable, and it had done nothing save no one surfaced only because a wounded chief had dragged himself to a landline and a woman in a cell had thought 3 moves ahead. The system had kept the evidence and then buried it in a place no one would ever think to look unless they already suspected the crime. That, Emily argued, was the failure. Not just Whitaker. The fact that catching Whitaker had required a near miracle. So she pushed for something simple and hard. A review protocol. Anytime an extraction request was denied and casualties followed, the associated command channel recording would be automatically flagged and independently reviewed outside the chain of command that had made the call. Not to second-guess every hard decision. Hard decisions were real, and Emily knew that better than anyone. But to make sure that when a commander told a team the sky was closed, someone somewhere checked whether the sky had actually been closed. To make sure the truth did not need luck to surface. To make sure the next Elias Turner would not depend on a chance that a good man happened to survive to tell the story. There was resistance. Of course there was resistance. There was always resistance from the same instinct that had made 2 men call General Anderson about institutional stability, the instinct that would always rather avoid embarrassment than admit fault. But Emily had 2 things those men did not. She had proof, the kind that played in a room and silenced it. And she had a Gold Star mother named Ruth Turner who was willing to say her son's name out loud to anyone who tried to keep it quiet. It took the better part of 2 years, but the protocol became real. And on the day it was formalized, Emily did not celebrate. She drove to a small town to a house with a folded flag on the mantle, and she sat with Ruth Turner and she told her it was done. That from now on, when a soldier called for help and was refused, the truth would not need a miracle. That her son's name was attached to the change quietly in the language of the protocol, so that every officer who ever operated under it would be operating under a rule that existed because of Elias Turner. Ruth Turner cried then, not the crying of grief, something else. The crying of a mother whose son's death had finally been given a meaning worthy of him. He'd have liked that, she said. My Elias, knowing he kept somebody else's boy safe, that's exactly the kind of thing he'd have liked. Whitaker went to prison. Emily did not attend that either. She heard about it the way you hear about weather distantly, without much feeling. He had lost everything. He built his life on the authority, the rank, the belief that his word was the same as truth. And in the end, the thing that destroyed him was not Emily and not the panel and not even the recording. It was the truth itself, which had been sitting in an archive the whole time, patient waiting, requiring only that someone be willing to go and find it and carry it into the light, no matter what it cost them. The recording had not destroyed Colonel Jonathan Whitaker. The recording was just a machine that remembered. What destroyed him was that a wounded chief refused to stay in his hospital bed, and a frightened lieutenant pointed toward a landline, and a sergeant refused to seal a file, and a shaking young specialist told the truth anyway, and a major pulled a thread she could have left alone, and an old general chose his honor over his career, and a Gold Star mother demanded that her son mean something. What destroyed him was people. Ordinary people, most of them afraid, every one of them choosing to do the right thing when the easy thing was right there for the taking. Emily Carter served many more years. She was promoted eventually, though she never chased it. She commanded other teams, brought other people home, and every single time a helicopter touched down and she counted the faces coming off it, she thought of the 14 she had counted that morning at Coronado, And she thought of the three she had never gotten to count 14 months before, and she made sure every time that someone came. Because that was the whole thing. That was the entire promise the uniform was built on. When you call somebody answers, a title does not make a leader. A rank does not make a commander worthy of the men who follow them. Power that abandons the people it exists to protect is not power at all. It is only cowardice wearing a uniform. Emily Carter had learned that on a runway at dawn, stripped of her weapon and her badge and her command, standing straight in front of a man who had betrayed everything the uniform meant. And she had spent the rest of her life making sure that the truth when it mattered most would never again have to depend on luck to be heard. The colonel betrayed a soldier who trusted the chain of command, and he did it twice and he lied about it, and he almost got away with it forever. But he forgot that the truth does not disappear just because a powerful man wishes it gone. It waits, and as long as there is one person willing to stand up scared and outmatched and with everything to lose and say out loud what actually happened, the truth will always in the end find its way into the light. General Anderson kept his word, and it turned out that keeping it cost him exactly what he had said it would. Within a week, the two men who had called him about institutional stability made their displeasure known. It did not come as a shout. Men at that level never shouted. It came as an empty chair at a meeting he had chaired for 6 years, a meeting that had somehow been rescheduled to a day he could not attend, with a new name at the head of the table by the time he returned. It came as an invitation that did not arrive to a dinner where the decisions that shape careers were made over quiet conversation. It came as a phone call from an old colleague, awkward and apologetic, telling him that perhaps it would be best if he kept a lower profile for a while just until things settled. Anderson listened to all of it, and he felt exactly nothing, which surprised even him. When Emily heard about it, she came to his office to apologize for the cost he was paying on account of a fight she had started. She got about 4 words into it before he raised a hand and stopped her cold. "Don't," he said. "Don't you dare come in here and apologize to me for this. Sir, you're losing things that took you a career to build because of a case I brought to you. That's on me. It is not on you, Commander, and I'll thank you not to steal it from me." Anderson leaned back in his chair and studied her. "Let me tell you something about what they're taking. Committees, dinners, invitations, the little machinery of influence that men my age start to mistake for the actual work." He shook his head slowly. "I spent too many years caring about that machinery, worrying about which room I was in, whose good graces I was in. And you know what all of it was for, so that one day when something like this landed on my desk, I'd have the standing to do something about it. That was supposed to be the point of all the maneuvering. The influence was supposed to be a tool for a moment exactly like this one. And now they're taking the tool away for using it," Emily said quietly. "Now they're taking the tool away for using it," Anderson agreed, "which tells you everything you need to know about what that tool had become. If the price of keeping my committees was staying quiet while a colonel got away with murder, then those committees were never worth what I paid to get them." He looked at her, and there was a fierce old light in his eyes. "I'm 63 years old, Commander. I have done this chief as well as I know how for 4 decades. And if the very last thing I do in this uniform is drag the truth about Elias Turner into the daylight, then I will hang it up prouder than I've ever been. They can have their rooms. They cannot have my honor. That's the one thing in this whole business that was never theirs to give or take." Emily did not apologize again, but she carried what he said with her because it was the same thing she had felt in the cell, the same thing that had kept her spine straight on the runway, put into the plain words of a man who had spent a lifetime learning it. There were things they could take from you, and there was one thing they could not unless you handed it over yourself. The formal review convened 3 weeks after the Ridge, and it was everything Anderson had promised it would be. Thorough, on the record, impossible to seal. Emily had expected it to feel like a victory. It did not. It felt like surgery, necessary and precise and painful, the careful cutting away of a lie that had grown into the body of an institution and would have to be removed piece by piece. The Ridge recording was entered into evidence first, and it was played in full for a panel of 7 senior officers who sat in absolute silence as Whitaker's own voice denied 14 soldiers the help they had begged for. Emily had heard it 3 times now. It did not get easier. She watched the faces of the panel as her own voice came through the speaker flat and controlled, requesting emergency extraction, And then Whitaker's voice, calm and cold, citing a weather restriction that had never existed. She watched a colonel on the panel close his eyes. She watched a woman with a general's star lean forward slowly, as if drawn toward the speaker against her will. And then the second recording was entered and the room changed. Because the first recording, terrible as it was, ended well. The panel knew that. They knew the 14 came home. There was a floor beneath the horror of it, the knowledge that this story had a survivor telling it. The second recording had no such floor. They heard Staff Sergeant Elias Turner request extraction, his voice younger than Emily had imagined, steadier than it had any right to be. They heard him request it a second time, and now there was gunfire, distant but real cracking behind his words. A third time, closer now, his breathing audible, the discipline in his voice, straining against something no 29-year-old should have to hold. And they heard Whitaker, unchanged, unbothered, sitting somewhere safe, deny him with the same cold words he would use on Emily 14 months later. Adverse conditions. Hold position. Follow the order. And then the fourth request, and the denial, and the last thing anyone would ever hear from Elias Turner. Roger, holding position, out. The recording hissed into static and then into silence. The panel did not move. The colonel, who had closed his eyes during the first recording, now put his hand over his whole face and held it there, and his shoulders moved once, and no one in that room pretended not to see it, and no one held it against him. The woman with the star sat back very slowly, and for a long moment the only sound in the room was the low electric hum of the equipment that had just played a young man's death into a room full of people who had the power to have prevented a dozen more like it, if only they had listened to the machines that were always listening. Emily sat with her hands folded and made herself breathe. When they called her to testify, she told them everything. The ridge, the denial, the clear sky full of stars, and the empty weather system. The alternate channel, the authorization. She had invoked the words she had spoken out loud so they would be captured, because some instinct born of reading too many neat reports had told her that a day like this might come. She did not embellish. She did not perform. She gave them the truth the way she gave orders, plainly and completely, and she did not look at Whitaker once. Then they asked her the question she had known was coming, the one Anderson had asked her in his office. Why had she raised the Turner case at all, when the Ridge recording had already cleared her completely, when she could have walked away with her career restored and her conscience quiet? Emily was silent for a moment. She thought about how to say it so they would understand. Because I came home and he didn't, she said finally. And when I found out that the only real difference between Elias Turner and me was that I had a channel he was never briefed on, and a few seconds he was never given. I couldn't hold on to my restored career like it was clean. It wasn't clean, it was luck. He did everything right, everything I did and more, and he died because a man lied to him and his family buried him, believing the weather took him. She looked at the panel, one face at a time. There wasn't a version of this where I walked away and could still look at myself in a mirror. That's the whole answer. I didn't do it because I'm brave. I did it because I couldn't live with the alternative. Those aren't the same thing, and I won't pretend they are. The woman with the star spoke then for the first time. Commander, many officers in your position would have considered the matter closed once their own name was cleared. You understand that? I understand it, ma'am. I just don't agree with it. My name being cleared doesn't clear his. My 14 coming home doesn't bring his 3 back. The case was never closed. It was only quiet. There's a difference, and I wasn't willing to mistake one for the other. The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once and wrote something down, and Emily never did learn what it was. Whitaker was there, and he had lawyers now, good ones, and they fought the way good lawyers fight. They argued context. They argued the impossible pressures of command, the calculus no one wanted to talk about, the truth that a commander must sometimes weigh the value of a rescue against the lives of the crew he would be sending into a hopeless situation. They argued that reasonable officers could disagree about where that line fell, and that hindsight made villains of men who had only made hard choices with incomplete information. And for a while, in the careful and reasonable language of the proceeding, it almost sounded like a thing a decent person could believe. Emily felt the room bend toward it, just slightly, the way rooms bend toward a confident voice. She felt the old fear that Whitaker would do what men like Whitaker always seemed to do, which was to talk his way out, to reframe the unforgivable as the merely difficult to survive on the strength of sounding reasonable. And then the panel asked him the one question his lawyers could not answer for him, the question that no amount of context could survive. Colonel Whitaker, you cited a weather restriction to Commander Carter on the ridge. You cited adverse conditions to Staff Sergeant Turner 14 months earlier. This panel is asking you to provide documentation for either one: the advisory, the source, the system entry, any record anywhere that these conditions existed. Take whatever time you need. The room went quiet, and Emily watched a man who had built his entire life on the belief that authority and truth were the same thing sit in front of that panel with absolutely nothing in his hands. Because there was nothing. There had never been anything. The restrictions had lived only in his voice spoken into radios he had forgotten were listening, and now that he was being asked to produce them as facts rather than assert them as authority, they simply were not there. They had never been there. They dissolved the moment anyone asked them to stand on their own. The conditions, Whitaker began, and his voice was not quite as smooth as it had been, were an assessment, a judgment based on my read of the tactical picture at the time. A judgment, the panel officer said. You described it to two separate teams as a restriction. Not a judgment, a restriction. Something external to your judgment, something imposed from outside. You told those men the sky was closed. So this panel will ask you directly, and it will ask you to answer with a single word. Was there a weather restriction on the night you denied Commander Carter's team, yes or no? The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. No, Whitaker said at last, and it came out barely above a whisper. There was no formal restriction. So you lied to them. I made a decision I believed was correct. Colonel, the officer's voice did not rise, and that was what made it terrible. You are not being asked whether you believed your decision was correct. You are being asked whether you lied about the reason for it. You told 14 soldiers the sky was closed so they would obey without argument when the sky was open, and the real reason was a choice you did not want to defend. Did you or did you not lie to them so they would follow an order they would have questioned if you had told them the truth? And Colonel Jonathan Whitaker, cornered at last with no rank left that mattered and no authority left to hide behind and no story left that anyone would let him control, said the truest thing he had said in 14 months. Yes, he said, I lied to them. The room did not gasp. It did not need to. The words settled over everything final and complete, and heavier than any verdict could have been because it had come from his own mouth. Emily watched a lifetime of careful construction collapse into a single syllable. He had lied so that men would die quietly and obediently, and he had just admitted it out loud on the record in a room full of people who would remember it for the rest of their lives. There was nowhere left for him to go, and Emily felt no triumph. She felt only a vast and weary sadness because it had taken so much cost, so much required a near miracle of ordinary people making brave choices just to arrive at a man finally admitting the thing that had always been true. The panel's findings came down 2 weeks later. Colonel Jonathan Whitaker was found to have knowingly falsified operational orders, resulting in the deaths of Staff Sergeant Elias Turner and 2 members of his team, and to have attempted the same with Commander Carter's unit. The matter was referred for court-martial. Emily did not celebrate. Reynolds came to find her when the findings were announced, his shoulder healed now out of the sling, though he still favored it in the cold, and he asked her if she wanted to go watch when they finalized it. You don't want to see him get what's coming, Reynolds asked. No, Emily said, I don't. After what he did to you, to the team to Brooks, I'd have thought you'd want a front row seat. Emily thought about it the way she thought about everything honestly and completely. I've seen enough of Jonathan Whitaker to last me the rest of my life, Marcus. And watching him fall doesn't fix a single thing. Turner's still gone. Those 2 men with him are still gone. Whitaker in a cell doesn't give Ruth Turner her son back. It doesn't unbury anybody. She shook her head. Men like him, we tell ourselves that watching them get punished is justice. But it's not really. It's just the end of the wrong. The right thing is a whole separate job, and it starts after he's gone, and it's got nothing to do with him at all. The families, Reynolds said quietly. The families, Emily agreed. Reynolds was silent for a moment. Then he said, you know, when I dragged myself down to that equipment room with a busted shoulder to call Morgan, I thought I was doing it to save you. Get the recording, clear your name, get you your command back. That was the whole mission in my head. Save the commander. He looked at her. I didn't know I was pulling a thread that went back 14 months. I didn't know there was a whole other story hiding under yours. None of us knew, Emily said. That's the part that should scare everybody, Marcus. It was all there the whole time, sitting in an archive. Turner's recording existed for 14 months, complete undeniable, and it did nothing save nobody because nobody had a reason to go looking for it. The truth was just sitting in the dark waiting for a wounded chief to crawl to a landline. If your shoulder had been a little worse, if Pratt hadn't pointed you to that phone, if Morgan hadn't picked up, if any one of a dozen scared people had made the easy choice instead of the hard one, Whitaker would still be in command right now, and Turner would still be a man the weather took. She let that sit. That's the thing I can't let go of. Not that he did it, that we almost never caught him. That catching him took a miracle. And that thought, more than the verdict, more than the court-martial, more than her own vindication, was the one that would shape everything Emily did next. But first there was Ruth Turner. General Anderson had insisted on notifying Elias Turner's family himself in person, and he had asked Emily to come with him, and she had said yes without hesitation, and then spent 3 days more frightened than she had been on the ridge. Because a firefight she understood. She knew how to survive being shot at. She did not know how to walk into a mother's home and take away the story she had grieved for 14 months and hand her a worse one in its place. The Turner home was in a small town, the kind of place where the whole community had mourned when the gold star went up in the window. Ruth Turner was a small woman with steel in her spine and grief worn so deep into her that it had become part of how she stood. She opened the door and saw a general in dress uniform on her porch, and Emily beside him, and her face did something complicated and awful, because a general at your door is never good news, and she had already received the worst news a mother can get. "General," she said carefully, "I don't understand. My Elias, that was over a year ago. We buried him. It's finished." "What is this, Mrs. Turner?" Anderson said, and his voice was gentle in a way Emily had not heard from him before. "My name is Michael Anderson. This is Commander Emily Carter. May we come in? There's something you need to hear, and it isn't a thing to say on a doorstep." She let them in. She sat them down. She made coffee out of the reflex of a woman raised to be hospitable, even in the presence of the unknown. And Anderson accepted it because refusing would have taken something from her, and they sat in a living room with a folded flag on the mantel and photographs of a young man in uniform covering the walls, a boy grinning at his graduation, a young man in the field, a son frozen at 29 forever. And then General Anderson, 63 years old, 4 decades in the service, a man who had faced enemy fire and impossible commands, did the hardest thing Emily had ever watched anyone do. He told a mother the truth. He told her that her son had not died in adverse conditions. He told her that Elias had requested extraction 4 times, that he had held his position and kept his men together and led them exactly the way a leader is supposed to lead. He told her that the man who should have sent help refused and lied about the reason and buried the lie in a report that called a betrayal a misfortune. And he told her, because it mattered, because her son had earned it, that Elias had obeyed his final order the way a good soldier obeys, trusting that the man on the other end of the radio was telling him the truth about the sky. Ruth Turner listened to all of it without moving. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Her face did not crumble the way Emily had braced for. Something harder happened instead, something worse to watch. A slow understanding settled into a woman who had spent 14 months building a fragile piece on top of a lie, and who now had to tear that piece apart with her bare hands to make room for the truth. When Anderson finished, the silence went on for a long time. 14 months, Ruth said finally. Her voice was very quiet. For 14 months, I told myself there was nothing anyone could have done, that the weather turned, that the enemy was too strong, that it was just his time and no one was to blame because a mother can't survive on anger, so I laid it down. I made my peace. Her voice cracked just once. And you're sitting in my living room telling me there was somebody to blame the entire time, that the peace I made was built on a lie. Yes, ma'am, Anderson said. I'm afraid I am. My Elias called for help 4 times. 4 times, Mrs. Turner. And nobody came. No, ma'am, nobody came. Anderson's voice was rough now, and he did not try to hide it. And I need you to hear the next part, because it's the part that matters, and your son earned every word of it. He did nothing wrong, not one thing. He led his men the way we pray every leader will lead. He held that position because he was ordered to hold it, and he trusted that order, and that trust is the finest thing about him. It is not the thing that failed. The thing that failed was the man who lied to him. Your son was not beaten by conditions no one could control, ma'am. Your son was a good soldier betrayed by a bad commander. And there is a whole world of difference between those two things, and you have a right to know which one is true. Ruth Turner was quiet, and then she turned to Emily, who had not yet spoken, who had been sitting with the almost unbearable weight of being the one who came home when Elias had not. And you, Ruth said, Commander Carter, the general, I understand. But you, what's your part in this? Why are you in my home? Emily's throat was so tight it hurt. Mrs. Turner, 14 months after your son, the same commander did the same thing to me and my team. He denied our extraction. He lied about the reason the exact same way. The only difference, the only one, is that I had a way out. Your son was never given. An alternate channel he was never briefed on. A few seconds he never got. I took it, and my 14 people came home. She had to stop and steady herself. I'm here because when I found out about your son, I couldn't let it stay buried. I have 14 people alive tonight because of a chance Elias never had. And the least I owed him was to make sure his family knew the truth about how he died. He's the reason I'm here, ma'am. In a way that's hard to explain, he's the reason. Because it should have been my mother getting a visit like the one you got. By every odd, it should have been me on that ridge with no way out. He didn't get the luck I got. And I couldn't take my life back and leave him a comfortable lie. So I made him a promise I never got to say to his face. I promised him that somebody would come for the truth even though nobody came for him. Ruth Turner looked at Emily for a long, long time, and then the steel in her spine bent finally and she reached across the small space between them and took Emily's hand, and she gripped it hard the way Reynolds had gripped Emily's hand in the cell, the way people hold on when the words have all run out. Thank you, Ruth said. Her eyes were wet now, but her voice held. For coming, for not letting them keep it quiet. I heard things, you know. Even out here, word travels. I heard there was pressure to handle it all inside, keep it neat, keep it away from families like mine. She looked between the two of them. And you fought that. You could have let my boy stay a comfortable story that made everyone's life easier, and you didn't. You chose to make it harder for yourself so that I could have the truth. I know what that cost you. I'm not a fool. It cost us nothing worth keeping, ma'am, Anderson said quietly. Ruth wiped her eyes, and then slowly the grief in her face reorganized itself into something else. Something with a spine and a purpose. Then here's what I need from the both of you, she said. I don't want my son to be the reason one bad colonel goes to prison and then everyone dusts off their hands and calls it justice. That is not enough. Do you hear me? Elias did not die so that one man could be punished. If you want to honor my son, you make sure that this can never happen to another mother's boy. You make certain that when a soldier calls for help and some coward says no and lies about it, there is a way for the truth to come out that does not depend on luck. Because my Elias had no luck, and I will not spend the rest of my life knowing another mother might lose her son the same way, waiting on the same miracle that almost didn't come. Her grip tightened until it nearly hurt. You promise me that, Commander Carter. You look me in the eye and you promise me you will make it so the next Elias does not have to be lucky. And Emily Carter, who had made a promise to a dead man she never met, now made the same promise to his living mother, and she meant it with everything left in her. I promise you, she said, holding Ruth's eyes without flinching. Your son is going to change how this works. Not as a footnote, not as a quiet settlement. He is going to be the reason it gets better, and his name is going to be on it. I give you my word, and I have never in my life broken my word to anybody who was counting on it. She kept it. It did not happen quickly because things worth doing never do. But Emily Carter restored to her command, and now carrying a reputation that even the officers who disliked her could not wave away, began to push. She used the two recordings as the twin foundations of an argument she made again and again to anyone who would listen, and a great many who would rather not have. The evidence, she said, had existed the entire time. Turner's recording had sat complete and undeniable in an archive for 14 months and had saved no one had surfaced. No Truth had done precisely nothing because it had depended on a wounded chief dragging himself to a landline and a woman in a cell thinking 3 moves ahead. The system had faithfully preserved the proof of a murder and then buried it in a place no one would ever look unless they already knew the crime had happened. That Emily argued over and over in rooms full of skeptics, in rooms full of allies, and rooms full of men who wished she would let it go was the real failure. Not just Whitaker. The fact that stopping Whitaker had required a chain of ordinary miracles. So she pushed for something simple and hard to argue against. A review protocol. Anytime an extraction request was denied and casualties followed, the associated command channel recording would be automatically pulled and independently reviewed outside the chain of command that had made the call. Not to second-guess every hard decision, because hard decisions were real, and Emily knew that better than almost anyone alive. But to guarantee that when a commander told a team the sky was closed, someone somewhere would check whether the sky had actually been closed. To make certain the truth would never again need luck to surface. To make certain the next Elias Turner would not have to depend on the chance that a good person happened to survive to tell the story. There was resistance. Of course there was resistance. It came from the same instinct that had made 2 men call General Anderson about institutional stability, the instinct that would always prefer avoiding embarrassment to admitting fault that treated the reputation of the institution as more sacred than the lives the institution existed to protect. Emily met that resistance in meeting after meeting, and there were days she came home certain she had lost, certain the protocol would die quietly, the way inconvenient things always died. But Emily had 2 things the resistance did not. She had proof, the kind that played through a speaker and silenced a room and could not be argued into meaning something else. And she had a Gold Star mother named Ruth Turner who was willing to say her son's name out loud to anyone who tried to make it disappear, who wrote letters and made calls and sat in waiting rooms. A small woman with steel in her spine who had buried a son once and would be damned before she let him be buried a second time under bureaucratic silence. It took the better part of 2 years. There were setbacks that felt final and were not. There were allies who wavered and returned, and opponents who softened when they finally heard the recordings for themselves, because it turned out that very few people could listen to Elias Turner say Roger holding position out and then go back to arguing about institutional stability with a straight face. And in the end, the protocol became real. On the day it was formalized, Emily Carter did not celebrate. She did not go to a ceremony or accept congratulations or stand for a photograph. She got in her car and drove to a small town, to a house with a folded flag on the mantle and a boy's face on every wall, and she sat down across from Ruth Turner and she told her it was done. She told her that from that day forward, when a soldier called for help and was refused and men died, the truth would no longer need a miracle to be heard, that a machine would be checked, that a lie about the sky would be caught. And she told her that her son's name was written into the protocol itself quietly in the dry official language of such things, so that every officer who ever operated under it would be operating under a rule that existed because a staff sergeant named Elias Turner had requested extraction 4 times and been abandoned, and because his mother had refused to let that abandonment mean nothing. Ruth Turner cried then, not the crying of grief. Emily had seen enough of that in this house to know the difference. This was something else. This was the crying of a mother whose son's death had finally been given a meaning worthy of the man he had been. He'd have liked that, Ruth said when she could speak. My Elias, knowing he kept some other mother's boy safe, that he made it so nobody else has to wait on a miracle that might not come. She smiled through the tears. That's exactly the kind of thing my boy would have wanted. He was always looking out for the younger ones. Always. Even at the end, holding that position, I know he was thinking about his men before himself. That's just who he was. She reached out and took Emily's hand one last time. You gave him back to me, Commander. Not the way I wanted, God knows. But you gave me back the truth of who my son was. A good soldier, not a man the weather beat. A good soldier who was failed by a bad man. I can carry that. I couldn't carry the lie once I knew it was a lie, but I can carry the truth. The truth I can live with for the rest of my days. Whitaker went to prison. Emily did not attend, and she did not follow the details. And she heard about the final sentence the way a person hears about distant weather without much feeling at all. He had lost everything he had built his life upon the authority, The rank, the bone-deep belief that his word was the same as the truth. And in the end, the thing that destroyed him was not Emily and not the panel and not even the recordings themselves. It was the truth which had been sitting patiently in an archive the entire time, asking nothing of anyone except that someone be brave enough to go and find it and carry it into the light no matter what it cost them to do it. Because that was the lesson Emily Carter carried for the rest of her life, and it was the lesson she made sure to pass to every young officer who ever served under her. The recording had not destroyed Colonel Jonathan Whitaker. The recording was only a machine that remembered. What destroyed him was people. A wounded chief who refused to stay in his hospital bed. A frightened lieutenant who pointed toward a landline and then walked away fast. A communications sergeant who refused to seal a file and trusted his conscience instead. A shaking young specialist who told the truth in front of the man who could destroy him. A major who pulled a 14-month-old thread she could easily have left alone. An old general who chose his honor over his career and never once looked back. And a Gold Star mother who demanded that her son's death be made to matter. Ordinary people, most of them afraid. Every single one of them choosing to do the right thing at the exact moment the easy thing was sitting right there for the taking. Emily Carter served many more years, and she was promoted eventually, though she never once chased it. She commanded other teams and brought other people home, and every single time a helicopter touched down and she stood on the flight line counting the faces coming off it, she thought of the 14 she had counted at Coronado in the gray light of that terrible dawn. And she thought of the 3 she had never gotten the chance to count 14 months before. And she made certain every time, without exception, that somebody came. Because in the end, that was the whole of it. That was the entire promise the uniform had ever been built upon. When you call, somebody answers. A title does not make a leader. A rank does not make a commander worthy of the men and women who follow them into the dark. And power that abandons the very people it exists to protect is not power at all. It is only cowardice wearing a uniform, and the truth will find it out in the end, however long it takes, however deep it is buried, because there will always somewhere be one person willing to stand up scared and outmatched with everything to lose and say out loud what actually happened. Colonel Jonathan Whitaker betrayed a soldier who trusted the chain of command, and he did it twice, and he lied about it both times, and for 14 months, he got away with it completely. But he made one mistake that undid all the rest. He believed that being powerful was the same as being right, and he forgot that the truth does not vanish simply because a powerful man wishes it gone. The truth waits. It waited in an archive for 14 months, and it waited in the memory of a boy on a runway, and it waited in the steady voice of a woman who would not be broken in a cold gray cell. And when the moment finally came, the truth spoke in Whitaker's own voice, and it brought the whole thing crashing down. The recording did not expose Colonel Whitaker. Courage did. And in the end, that is the only thing that ever truly does.